Chapter 339. I really didn't expect that Li Minghan would have a son like you. The surprise on Yin Zhang's face deepened as he clicked his tongue. During the trip to Qing'an Prefecture, the young man in front of him had left a deep impression on him. It wasn't just because of his amazing attainments in calligraphy and painting. After that day, driven by curiosity, he learned more about him from his old friend Dong Wenyin. The author of the Teachings of the World was unparalleled in poetry. His line "Love the upper floors" made countless scholars blush and reformed torture methods. Of course, Yin Zhang still loved his semi-cursive script the most. He copied the 3 words on the plaque day and night, and could now emit 80 to 90% of its charm. Last time, he didn't ask Li Yi for advice because of his pride. After returning to the capital, he regretted his pride greatly. What was pride compared to the improvement of calligraphy? Yin Zhang hadn't expected to meet him again at the Li clan. His heart itched, and when he saw the wine cup on the table, his eyes lit up. He poured some wine into the cup, and using a piece of paper as a pen, he wrote 3 words on the table with his finger. He raised his head to look at Li Yi and asked, "How is it?" Li Yi lowered his head and saw the 3 words "County Magistrate Li" that hadn't dried yet. He wrote them in a natural and elegant manner, faintly resembling the style of the sage of calligraphy, Wang Shiji. Just from these 3 words, it could be seen that Assistant Minister Yan's calligraphy had reached a higher level. So, Li Yi gave a very pertinent evaluation. Wang Shiji's reputation as a sage of calligraphy was inseparable from decades of hard work. Just by copying the 3 words for a few days, he was able to learn half of its charm. The description "SOSO" was already a great compliment. Yin Zhang naturally understood this. The more he copied the 3 words, the more he understood the difference between him and the person who wrote it. He wouldn't use age to judge whether the young man in front of him had the qualifications to say these words. However, Yin Zhang understood this didn't mean that everyone understood. "So, you're so arrogant." Although Yin Zhang's calligraphy is not good, it's not something you can judge. A voice came from the side. It was an elegant man who looked at the words on the table. The elegant man walked around the table with his hands behind his back and said in surprise, "Tsk, long time no see. Brother Yan's semi-cursive script has become more refined. Did you steal another famous family's horizontal board and study it these days?" Yin Zhang was displeased. What did he mean by his calligraphy was not good? Although this guy came from a scholarly family, the Zhou family's calligraphy master was old Master Zhou, not Zhou Qiu. Why was he so proud? Master Zhou's calligraphy is upright, and can be said to be the best in the Jing kingdom. Compared to him, my calligraphy is naturally not presentable. Since junior supervisor Zhou has inherited Master Zhou's teachings, I naturally cannot compare to junior supervisor Zhou. Yin Zhang replied sarcastically. Master of Zhetqiu, Ztit was Zhou. Zhou was Zhou bite. On the surface, it was a compliment, but it was a sarcastic remark that Zhou Qiu only relied on his father and didn't have any real talent. Although the 2 of them were family friends and were usually close friends, whenever they talked about something that they were good at, they would always mock each other a little. Zhou Qiu looked at the table for a while with his hands behind his back. When the words on the table became blurred, he nodded and said, Strange. I haven't seen you for a few days, but you've made such great progress. Did you really get advice from a master, or did you find a famous card?" Yin Zhang twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "Let's not talk about this for now. You keep saying that this young man is arrogant. Why don't you compete with him? You're also good at semi-cursive script. Write a few words on the table with your fingers. Let's see who the arrogant one is." Zhou Qiu shook his head and said, "It's better to compete with you. But him? If people know, they'll say that I'm bullying the younger generation." Shiping Stone Scripture. Yin Zhang looked at him and said, "If you think your writing is better, I'll give you the Shiping Stone Scripture. If you lose, don't blame me for tearing down the horizontal board of the House of Zhou tonight." Zhou Qiu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said with uncertainty, "You mean the original post of the Shiping Stone Scripture? It's really with you." The Shiping Stone Scripture was the masterpiece of the creator of the Flying White style, Kai Yong of the Eastern Han Dynasty. The original post was very valuable for collection and research. It would be a blessing to get it. As for the horizontal board of the House of Zwa, he didn't worry about it at all. His calligraphy attainments were not great, but they could be described as minor achievements. How could he lose to a young man who was still wet behind the ears? Even if he started practicing since he was in his mother's womb, he couldn't beat him. What do you think? Do you dare? Yin Zhang looked at him and asked with a smile. Why not? Zuoqiu laughed and said, It's rare for you to be so generous. How can I spoil your fun? After that he dipped his finger in the wine. In a flash, the 4 big words, happiness like the East Sea, appeared on the table. He wrote the words smoothly and continuously. Zuoqiu's calligraphy attainments could be remarkable if he could write with his finger dipped in wine. Ordinary people couldn't even write with a brush. Come on, it's your turn. Yin Zhang didn't look at Zuoqiu's words at all. With a cunning smile on his face, he was already planning how to tear down the Zwa family's horizontal board at night. He hurriedly urged Li Yi. Zuoqiu wanted his Shiping stone scripture. It was impossible. It would be better if it was Elder Zwa. Even if Elder Zwa came in person, Yin Zhang was 70% sure that he could win. Seeing Yin Zhang's expression, Zuoqiu's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly had a bad feeling. Yin Zhang was not a fool. The Shiping stone scripture must be extremely important to him. How could he give it away for free? Could it be that he was really sure that he could win? Turning to look at the young man again, Zuoqiu shook his head and suppressed this unrealistic idea. I'm not interested. Li glanced at the words on the table and said, shaking his head, the Shiping stone scripture and the Zwa family's horizontal board had nothing to do with him. This assistant minister Yin has a good plan. He's treating me as a tool. Are they familiar with each other? Tearing down someone else's horizontal board is no different from slapping him in the face. This is a great feud. Yin Zhang's expression froze. He hurriedly grabbed Zuoqiu's arm and said, I owe you one. Li thought. Last time when I snatched the horizontal board, I already owed him a favor, but he didn't take it seriously. Obviously, the assistant minister's favor is worthless. However, Li Yi didn't want to be pestered by him. He casually dipped his finger into the wine and drew 2 words on the table. He was ready to leave this troublesome place and let them catch up. Haha, is this what you're relying on? Seeing the messy handwriting on the table, Zuoqiu was stunned at first. Then he smiled and patted Yin Zhang's shoulder. He said, Brother Yin, tomorrow morning, I'll send someone to your mansion to get the Shiping stone scripture. Yin Zhang didn't expect that Li Yi wouldn't give him face at all. He was a little anxious and grabbed Li Yi's arm tightly. Write it carefully. If you win, you can make a request of me, as long as it's not too much. Stop it, second young master Yin. What are you doing? Just as Yin Zhang shook Li Yi's arm violently, a delicate voice suddenly came from not far away. Chapter 340. The dignified right assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel could not help but shiver after hearing that voice. He hurriedly let go of Li Yi's shoulder and turned around to explain. No, nothing. The beautiful woman walked over quickly and asked Li Yi. What were you doing just now? Did he bully you? Sister-in-law, you misunderstood. Yin Zhang said bitterly. He was not afraid of his father or his eldest brother at home, but he was afraid of this tough sister-in-law. How could he dare to admit it now? No. Li Yi shook his head. He had only heard that his aunt's husband's surname was Yin, but he did not expect it to be this Yin family. The woman looked at Yin Zhang suspiciously and then said to Li Yi, In a quarter of an hour, bring Yingkai to the hall to celebrate old madam's birthday with a few juniors. Got it. Li nodded as he glanced at the little fatty, who was still mumbling in the corner. Seeing his sister-in-law leave, Yin Zhang heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He turned to look at Li Yi and said, Even if it's not for my sake, for the sake of sister-in-law, let that arrogant person know that there is always someone better out there. How about that? Li thought for a moment. Looking at the almost dry handwriting on the table, he wet his fingertip and wrote, Longevity as long as the South Mountain, next to fortune as vast as the East Sea. He wiped his hands, walked to the little fatty and said, Let's go. How about it? Do you still want the accelerating peace stone scripture? Yin Zhang said proudly, when he saw Zuoqiu staring at the handwriting on the table in a daze. Zuoqiu opened his mouth, but could not say that he had won no matter what. The plaque on the Zuo family's gate was important, but so was his face. He wasn't shameless enough to say that he wasn't as skilled as others. I lost. This young man, where did you find him? Zuoqiu sighed and looked up at him. Under the temptation of the accelerating peace stone scripture, his normal thinking ability had been affected. After so many years of dealing with Yin Zhang, he should have known that a cunning man like Yin Zhang would not make a losing deal. He knew from the beginning that he would win, so he deliberately used the accelerating peace stone scripture to provoke him. His purpose had always been to get the plaque on the Zuo family's gate. Yin Zhang said jokingly, "That's none of your business. I just want to ask you one question. Do you still mean what you said just now?" Of course. Zuoqiu secretly cursed the old fox in his heart. Just now, he had taken advantage of his contempt for the young man. Who would have thought that an inexperienced boy could write such a beautiful semi-cursive script? The plaque on the gate of the Zuo family is right there. If you have the ability, come and get it. Zuoqiu left as if he was escaping after saying that. Yin Zhang carefully thought about what Zuoqiu said just now. What did Zuoqiu mean by take it if you can? Without his permission, the old master of the Zuo family would not let him off. Yin Zhang carefully thought about what he just said. What did he mean by take it if you can? Without his permission, Grandpa Zuo wouldn't let him off the hook if he took the plaque off the Zuo's gate. There were actually many people in the younger generation of the Li family, including the collateral branches. However, Li Yi did not know any of them, except for the little fatty. "Grandma, I wish you happiness as boundless as the East Sea and longevity as the pine tree in Nanshan. This is my congratulatory gift to you." "Grandma, I wish you happiness as boundless as the East Sea and longevity as the pine tree in Nanshan. This is my congratulatory gift to you." The younger generation stood respectfully at the bottom of the hall according to the order. They repeated the same congratulatory words over and over again. The gifts were not very expensive, so the old lady accepted them all with a smile. In return, she gave a red envelope, which might be even more expensive than the gifts from the younger generation. The little fatty was waiting anxiously. According to the order, the main branch was the last to be presented. The problem was that he might forget the poem he had just memorized. The little fatty's mother glanced at him from afar. This child would not tell them about the congratulatory gift for the old lady this year, nor did he ask them to prepare it for her. Even now, she did not know what he was going to give the old lady. The little fatty looked anxious. When it was finally his turn, he immediately ran up and said loudly, "I've composed a poem. I'd like to take this opportunity to present it to you, Grandma." The old lady was slightly stunned. Then she smiled and said, "Great, even our Inkai can compose poems. Quick, let me hear it." Everyone in the Li family, including the little fatty's parents, looked surprised. Inkai was famous for not being good at studying. He could not even recognize words. When did he learn to compose poems? The guests all had looks of interest on their faces. Previously, the juniors had only given them some mundane things. Occasionally, they would see something different, and that piqued their interest. "This child, what nonsense!" Li Mingyuan frowned and said in a low voice. Ignoring the crowd, the little fatty pointed at the old lady and began to shake his head. "This woman is not human." At this point, the voice paused for a moment, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. After that, he didn't continue. "What?" Everyone's expression froze when they heard that. The guests stared at the descendant, and the Li family was dumbfounded. "Bastard, what are you talking about?" Seeing that his son's first sentence was disrespectful to the old lady, Li Mingyuan's face darkened, and he strode over. The next moment, he finally thought of the next sentence. The pondering expression on the little fatty's face disappeared. He pointed at the Li family and said loudly, "All the children and grandchildren are thieves." The guests held back their laughter, and the faces of the Li family began to twitch. Li Mingyuan walked over and raised his hand high. He shouted sternly, "Shut up." A few black lines appeared on Li Yi's face. A good poem, that could change according to circumstances, had been recited by little fatty in such a manner. It could be said that there was no one in the past, and no one in the future who could do it. He walked forward helplessly and said, "Third uncle, please wait. I've been listening to Inkai reciting a poem today. The whole poem is this woman is not human, a fairy from the 9 heavens descending to the mortal world. All the children and grandchildren are thieves, stealing the immortal peaches and longevity for their loved ones." I think he must have been too nervous just now and memorized the wrong sequence. Yes, that's it. That's it. The little fatty hid behind Li and went down the slope. A fairy from the 9 heavens descending to the mortal world, stealing the immortal peaches and longevity for their loved ones. Hee, what a changing poem. Wonderful, wonderful. To be able to write such a poem, he must have some talent. The poem is plain and simple. It's not strange to say that it was written by a child. Everyone present was a high-ranking official and had received higher education. After understanding it, they looked at the little fatty and started chatting with a smile. Li Mingyuan looked at his son with a face full of doubt. He knew his son very well. It was already a miracle that he could write the 4 lines of the poem without a single mistake, let alone composing a poem. Could it be that this child had been hiding his talent all this while? The old mistress was very happy and praised the little fatty. She picked an expensive gift from the pile of congratulatory gifts and gave it to him on the spot. The little fatty hugged the gift and returned with a smile. According to the order, after the little fatty was second uncle's son, Liangjia, followed by Li. Other than the mutation caused by the little fatty, the Li family's genes were pretty good. A handsome young man took an item from second Aunt Fong and walked to the old mistress. He smiled and said, "This is Zhao Chun's longevity painting. It's my congratulatory gift to Grandma. I wish Grandma a long and happy life." It's Zhao Chun's longevity painting. It's said that he needs half a year to complete one. It's not easy to get it without 1,000 taels of silver. Although Zhao Chun is young, he's quite talented in calligraphy. Many young people like his calligraphy. He's quite thoughtful to get Zhao Chun's longevity painting. As the crowd discussed, the old mistress accepted the gift with a smile and opened it in front of everyone. Immediately, several people surrounded it. Longevity painting? Li frowned slightly and pondered. What's going on? Lu Rui walked to his side and asked with a frown as well. Opposite them, the wife of the Li family's master, Madame Fong, glanced over and revealed an unnoticeable smile. Chapter 341. Second brother, why did you get the longevity painting too? The little fatty had almost been put on the spot. After retreating, he stood obediently by his parents' side. When he saw his second brother presenting the congratulatory gift to his grandmother, he scratched his head and said with some doubt, "What's the matter? What do you mean? Who else gave the longevity painting to?" Li Mingyuan was still wondering if his son was really hiding his talent so well that even he, as his father, could not see through it. When he heard his son's soft murmur, he subconsciously asked. The little fatty scratched his head and said, "Big brother too. I saw him preparing the gift in his room 2 days ago. I think he said it was something called the longevity painting too." Really? The little fatty's mother asked in surprise. The biggest taboo when giving a gift was to be exactly the same as someone else's, especially when it was inferior to others. It would definitely be embarrassing in front of so many guests. It was the same longevity painting, but the famous scholar Zhao Chun's work was far superior to others. When the two of them presented their gifts one after another, everyone would naturally compare them. At that time, one of them would definitely look bad. It's true. If you don't believe me, you can ask second aunt. She even asked me that day. The little fatty patted his chest and said, "Second sister-in-law?" The Yin matriarch raised her head and looked at Madame Fong, who was standing not far away. She immediately understood. She was purposely trying to embarrass Big Brother's child in front of so many people. However, although he despised her method of using such a method to make things difficult for her own family, it was her freedom to give whatever gift she wanted. It was not good to criticize her. "What should we do?" Lu Rui stood beside Li Yi and asked softly. "What do you mean, what should we do? He gave it to him, and I gave it to me. We'll do what we have to do," replied Li Yi. He glanced at Madame Fong. He did not expect her to be so narrow-minded. How could she do something like this? The little fatty was heartless, and it would be easy for her to get information out of him. Rui already knew what gift Li Yi was going to give to old mistress. Hearing the words of the people around him, he roughly knew that the longevity painting that was presented just now should be quite precious. If Li Yi were to present his own, it would definitely be inferior. Why don't you give me this sword? Lu Rui raised her hand and handed over the sword that she always carried with her. Li Yi saw a flash of reluctance in her eyes. She had been carrying this sword with her since the first time he met Mississippi Lu. She did not sell it even during the most difficult times of her life. This was indeed a rare good sword. When Li Yi first wanted to borrow it to play with, she didn't even let him touch it. Forget it. Li Yi pushed the sword back. How much was face worth? Only Madame Fong cared about her face. Li Yi did not think that his face was more important than Mississippi Lu's beloved sword. After speaking, Liangjia walked down. Li Yi smiled at Mississippi Lu and walked up with the painting scroll. This is. Some of the guests were confused when they saw an unfamiliar young man walk up after Liangjia. He should be the son of the Li family's Dalong. I heard that a few days ago, the Li family found their eldest grandson and welcomed him into the manor. It should be him. Soon, everyone's eyes were on Li Yi. Most of them were very clear about the changes that happened to the Li family 20 years ago. The eldest grandson of the Li family, who had recently returned to the family, naturally received a lot of attention. A cold smile appeared on Madame Fong's face when she saw Li Yi holding something that looked like a painting scroll. Li Yi walked to the front of old mistress and said with a smile, "Your grandson has personally created a painting called Longevity Painting. I wish grandmother a prosperous life with the sun and the moon, as well as a spring crane." The longevity painting? A look of surprise appeared on the faces of the guests. The longevity painting again? The painting that Li Yingjie gave was Zhao Chun's work. Many officials and nobles in the capital liked to collect paintings. The eldest grandson of the Li family also gave a longevity painting. From what he said just now, it seemed that he wrote it himself. One was worth 1,000 taels of gold, while the other was probably just a piece of waste paper. His gift was similar to the one that the little fatty gave just now. The similarity was that they didn't need to spend too much effort and could save a lot of money. Liangjia, who had just stood at his spot, was slightly stunned. He turned around to look at his mother, and then at his brother, whom he was not very familiar with. His expression was a little dazed. Good. Old Madame Fong looked at him kindly, and did not show any other expression because of the words longevity painting. She smiled and said, "Thank you, Ear. Since I have accepted the longevity painting, I will give this Knight Emingzu to you." Old Madame Fong did not open it in front of Li Yi. She handed the painting scroll to a servant girl, and personally picked out a brocade box from the pile of gifts. She placed it in Li Yi's hands with a smile. All the guests, including the Li family members present, were stunned. In terms of value, the picture of 10,000 years was probably the least valuable of all the gifts tonight. However, the old madame's gift in return was the most valuable. Not to mention Liangjia, who had also given a picture of 10,000 years. Even the gift she gave to little fatty just now was far from comparable. Old Madame Fong's action caused everyone to look at Li Yi in a different light. Old Madame Fong was at least half the reason why the Li family was able to survive for so many years. Under such an occasion, she naturally would not do anything unnecessary. There must be a deeper meaning behind her action. Madame Fong's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. She didn't think that the old madam would protect him to such an extent that she would casually give the jade bracelet that had been passed down in the family to an outsider. They were both longevity painting, but the one that her son gave was thousands of times more precious than his, yet the effect was completely opposite. Did the old madam really think that way? In the next moment, Madame Fong's dark expression disappeared, and she immediately put on a smile. She walked up and said, "Since this is old Madame Fong's gift in return, you must put it away carefully. If I had known that nephew's gift was also longevity painting, I would have asked Yingjie to prepare something else. Speaking of which, nephew is considerate. Although Zhao Chun's longevity painting is good, he is an outsider. How can it be as precious as a family member's gift? Madame Fong smiled and walked to the servant girl's side. She took the painting scroll from her hands and praised. Ingjie has never had the heart to study since he was young. Nephew has indeed inherited eldest brother's talent. I believe this longevity painting will not be bad. Why don't you open it and take a look to make old Madame Fong happy? As she spoke, she opened the painting scroll and placed it on the table beside her. Old Madame Fong frowned. She wanted to stop her, but it was too late. The guests nearby quickly surrounded them. Chapter 342. Grandma, this is too expensive. I can't accept it. The Emingzu was very valuable, not to mention that it was a gift from his sister-in-law. Li quickly put the box back. He was not very interested in this kind of treasure. A pearl that emitted a faint fluorescent light was nothing. It could only light up an area the size of a palm. It was not even comparable to a 15-watt light bulb. We're family. It's not expensive. Just take it. Old Grandma smiled and stuffed the item back into Li Yi's hands. She had always felt extremely guilty towards her child, who had been wandering outside for 20 years. What was a Emingzu? Could it make up for what she owed him all these years? Li Yi held the box containing the Emingzu in his hands. He did not know how to reject old Grandma's insistence. A few surprised voices came from not far away. This 10,000 years painting does have some foundation. Interesting. Look, when these longevity characters are put together, doesn't it look like a spirit ape holding a peach? Take 2 steps back, and you'll see it more clearly. The 2 longevity paintings have their own merits. This one is not as good as Zhao Chun's in terms of foundation, but it wins in novelty. Not bad. The longevity painting personally made by the eldest grandson of the Li family was clearly not as mediocre as everyone had expected. It could not be compared to Chen Chun, who had already reached a high level in the art of calligraphy, but it was still above average. What was rare was that he had taken a different approach. He had used 100 longevity characters of various sizes to form the peach offering by the spirit ape, adding another layer of meaning. He had also spent a lot of effort. Madame Fong's face darkened when she did not see the scene she had expected. Let me take a look. A figure squeezed in from the back. Seeing the person, they all made way. Every member of the Zhua family was a master of calligraphy. Old Master Zhua, who was still alive, had a superb regular script. Although Zhua Qiu was not as famous as Old Master Zhua, he was only second to a few grandmasters, and was far from being a match for these laymen. Zhua Qiu picked up the scroll and admired it as he paced around, but he did not make any comments. Actually, the 10,000 lifespan painting did not really have 10,000 longevity characters. It was just a measure to describe a large number. The most commonly seen one should be called the 100 lifespan painting. The one in Zhua Qiu's hand was the century lifespan painting. The reason why the longevity painting was so popular was not because of the simple stacking of longevity characters. Each longevity character was written in a different way. Zhao Chun's longevity painting was extremely orderly. Although each character had a different shape, they were similar in size. Each line was vertical, and it was very neat. It was not an exaggeration to call it the longevity painting. In comparison, the one in Zhua Qiu's hand was the real longevity painting. Putting aside the longevity character from afar, this was clearly a painting of a spirit ape presenting a peach. Just from this, it could be seen that the person was not only skilled in calligraphy, but also in painting. Of course, Zhua Qiu did not care about the painting. His eyes were attracted by the longevity characters, big or small, straight or slanted. Although Zhao Chun was famous, Zhua Qiu felt that he was still very immature. If he wanted to find faults, he could find 10,000 flaws in the 10,000 lifespan painting. However, he could not find a single mistake in the painting in front of him. It was as if it was truly flawless. Of course, flawless did not exist. The only possibility was that he was not good enough to find any mistakes. Of course, he could not find any mistakes. Wang Shiji, Yan Zhenqing, Ouyang Sun, Zhao Mingfu, Lu Gongquan. The 10,000 lifespan painting was a combination of the works of countless calligraphy grandmasters. Regular script, semi-cursive script, and dozens of different characters were all created by the creator at his peak. If Zhuqiu could find any flaws in it, he would have been famous all over the world. In order to obtain this painting, he had temporarily put aside the scriptures that the old monk had asked for. He had consumed all the books on calligraphy and painting in the library. Mississippi Lou had come to him several times to play fight the landlord, but in the end, she stayed in the room as a maid to grind the ink. If he could not get something decent out of it, it would be a waste of his hard work for the past 2 days. Good calligraphy, good calligraphy. Holding the painting, Zhuqiu seemed to be intoxicated by it. He slowly walked through the crowd and gradually walked away under everyone's gaze. Bah, shameless guy. How dare he covet old madam's gift? Yin Zhang was the first to react. They had known each other for many years, so he naturally knew Zhuqiu's character. His expression changed, and he hurriedly chased after him. After a while, Zhuqiu put the 10,000 lifespan painting on the table with a regretful expression. With such a painting, he did not need any ancient calligraphy anymore. What a pity, what a pity! The guests were dumbfounded. Was it necessary for him to do this for a painting? The eldest grandson of the Li family was not a famous calligrapher. Was it worth it for Zhuqiu to do this? However, seeing that the two of them were staring at the painting and were unwilling to look away, even the slowest person would understand what was going on. This painting did not seem ordinary. When Zhao Chun took out the 10,000 lifespan painting, the two of them did not even look at it. There were those who were amazed, and there were those who were doubtful. However, there were even more people who doubted the identity of the owner of the painting. The eldest grandson of the Li family said that he had personally created this painting. However, how could it be something that could attract the attention of 2 skilled calligraphers to come from a young man? The old mistress personally put away the painting of 10,000 years, the smile on her face even wider. To her, it was enough as long as she knew that this was a congratulatory gift from her grandson. As for Zhuqiu and Yin Zhang, they were surrounded by several people, and faint voices could be heard. How is this longevity painting compared to Zhao Chun's? Can't be compared. That is Zhao Chun. They are both young people. It's possible for him to surpass Zhao Chun, but young supervisors was being too humble by saying that he is far behind him. Li Yi was playing with Mississippi Lou's sword in his hand, wasting time and boredom. People in the ancient times celebrated their birthday, unlike in modern times, where they could eat after cutting a cake and saying a few words of happy birthday. After going through a few complicated formalities, the chubby boy's stomach had been growling for at least a quarter of an hour, but he still hadn't received the order to start eating. The 2 men, who combined were older than the old mistress, sat beside Li Yi. They had been coaxing and pestering him for a long time, and they only had one request, which was for the old mistress's 10,000 years painting. Of course, Li Yi rejected such an unreasonable request without a second thought. Writing this painting was too exhausting, and he had not finished copying the scripture that he had promised the old monk. After the old mistress's birthday banquet, he would be leaving the capital city in a few days, so how would he have the time to write for them? Chapter 343. Vice Supervisor Zhua and Assistant Minister Yin said that Zhao Chun's longevity painting couldn't be compared to the painting of the young master of the Li family. Moreover, the other party is a few years younger than Zhao Chun. Could it be that the Li family really has a monster in this generation? The guests were all amazed when they talked about what had just happened. Zhao Chun was successful at a young age. Although he didn't have any dazzling achievements in the imperial examinations, his calligraphy and painting were top-notch. He was famous in the capital and left his peers far behind. Of course, Zhao Chun was still too young and inexperienced, so he couldn't be compared to real masters like Zhuqiu and Yin Zhang. However, an even younger talent had surpassed Zhao Chun in calligraphy, and made Zhuqiu admit that he was not as good as him. Other than a monster, no one knew what else to describe him. It was actually a good thing for a big family to have such a monster. It would be of great help to the spread of fame and the continuation of the family. However, the situation of the Li family was different. The eldest branch had disappeared 20 years ago, and the one in power now was the second master of the Li family. If the younger generation of the Li family was as mediocre as before, The position of the head of the family would still be passed to the eldest son of the second branch, even if the family declined. At such a critical moment, the eldest grandson of the Lee family, who could be called a monster, had returned. The attitude of the old mistress was unclear. Who would be the next head of the family? Of course, these were not things that they should worry about. Anyone with a sharp mind would be able to tell from the gloomy expression of the matriarch's wife that there was an undercurrent beneath the calm. The Lee family had already declined, and the Fong family wasn't easy to get along with. No one knew how they would settle this family matter. Lee Yi wasn't too interested in whether or not there was an undercurrent. At this moment, he was thinking about something else. He had made an agreement with the old monk that after the old woman's birthday, someone from the cold mountain temple would go down the mountain to get the scriptures. Xuanzang had gone through 81 difficulties and traveled thousands of miles in order to get the scriptures. He had suffered a lot and suffered a lot. He had been put in a steamer by various ferries and was almost steamed into a bun. Only then did he succeed. The old monk had only been delayed for a few days. It was too easy to get the scriptures. The capital was a place where anything could happen. Just as Li Yi was hesitating about how many days he should drag things out, a huge bald head appeared in his line of sight. At the same time, the surrounding guests also felt that their surroundings seemed to have brightened up. That is Grandmaster Tan Yin. That's Grandmaster Tan Yin. Why is Master Tan Yin here? Could it be that he is also here to celebrate the old madam's birthday? The sudden appearance of a bald head in a room full of guests was very eye-catching. If this bald head was a famous monk in the capital, who had received the royal family's hospitality many times, it would be difficult not to attract attention. There were countless Buddhist believers, and there were also many devout believers present. How could they not know Grandmaster Tan Yin of the Cold Mountain Temple? After receiving the servant's report, the old madam did not dare to delay, and immediately came to greet him. She first bowed respectfully and then said, "I didn't know that Grandmaster would come, and I was not able to welcome you. It is really impolite of me." At this time, Li Mingze, the master of the Li family, could only stand aside and did not have the right to speak. The old monk had his trademark smile on his face and said, "Madam, you don't have to be so courteous. I have come specially to celebrate your birthday. I don't have anything valuable on me, so I have a small gift. A handwritten copy of the Diamond Sutra is for you." A little monk behind him immediately handed over a simple wooden box. Grandmaster Tan Yin presented it with both hands and personally handed it to the old madam. Not to mention the guests. Even the people of the Li clan were flabbergasted when they saw this scene. Grandmaster Tan Yin was a famous monk who usually meditated on Zen and Taoism. It was extremely difficult for ordinary people to meet him. Even the nobles of the royal family had to make an appointment in advance if they wanted to see him. In comparison, the small Li family was really not worth mentioning. But it was such a small Li family that Grandmaster Tan Yin came in person, just to celebrate the old madam's birthday. Who dared to say that Grandmaster Tan Yin's handwritten sutra was a small gift? It was a small family. They might even treat it as a family heirloom. "Grandmaster, quickly take a seat." The old madam was also shocked and surprised. She did not dare to be negligent and personally led the old monk to the main seat. The old monk insisted on only sitting next to the old madam. Li Mingyuan tactfully sat at another table. The guests couldn't help glancing over. Except for the Empress Dowager's birthday, Grandmaster Tan Yin was invited. They had never heard of him celebrating anyone's birthday. What did the Li family do? Moreover, it seemed that the Grandmaster had great kindness to the Li family. Although Buddhism never participated in secular affairs, no one would ever look down on them because of this. When the news that Grandmaster Tan Yin had personally celebrated the old madam of the Li family's birthday spread out tomorrow, it would definitely cause a stir in the capital. After Grandmaster Tan Yin took his seat, Li Mingze immediately ordered the servants behind him, "Hurry up and change all the dishes on this table to vegetarian dishes." "There's no need." Grandmaster Tan Yin smiled and said, "Today is the old madam's birthday. This old monk will send a small gift and meet my young friend. I'll be leaving soon." "Young friend?" Li Mingze's expression froze. Everyone at the banquet had a puzzled look on their faces. The old monk stood up and gestured for the old madam to ignore him. He walked straight in a certain direction. How could the crowd really ignore him? They all looked in that direction. Don't be impulsive. Now is not the time. Lee hugged Mississippi Lou's sword and refused to let go. If she ran to the old monk to learn martial arts now, the old madam's 60th birthday would be ruined. Young friend Lee, this old monk came uninvited. I hope you don't blame me. Under everyone's gaze, the old monk walked over slowly and said with a smile. The young novice monk, who was following behind the old monk, looked up and saw the beautiful woman in front of him. His face suddenly turned pale, and a little panic appeared on his face. He hurriedly stood to the other side. I haven't seen you for a long time, master. You're still as elegant as ever. Lee thought about the scripture and said something carelessly. He thought to himself that this old monk was an eminent monk. Why didn't he have any calmness? Wasn't there still 2 days before the deadline to hand in the manuscript? The scripture hasn't been copied yet. There's no need to worry, master. I'll send someone to deliver it to the temple when the time comes. The old monk smiled and said, This matter is not urgent. This old monk just feels that young friend has a deep affinity with Buddhism. If there's a chance, it would be interesting to debate with you about Buddhism. Although the cold mountain temple is small, there will always be a place for you. Lee didn't know how deep his affinity with Buddhism was. He only knew that if this old monk wanted to debate with him about Buddhism, with the experience of countless predecessors for thousands of years, he would definitely be able to fool the old monk until his worldview collapsed, and he started to doubt his life. He might even give up being a monk, and there would be one less eminent monk in the world. This was a great sin. No matter how many pagodas he built, it would not be enough to repay the debt. It was better not to do such a sin. Buddhism can't be debated. In terms of Buddhism, master should find other eminent monks. Lee always felt that this old monk also wanted to trick him into becoming a monk. He was too bold. He dared to make Rui a living widow. Even if Rui didn't do it, Mississippi Lou would cut off his bald head and kick it like a ball. When Lee and the old monk were discussing whether he had a fate with Buddhism, he didn't realize that the atmosphere around them had become a little strange. Just now, he was still curious why Master Tan Yin would personally come to Madame Dowager's birthday with his identity. Now that he saw the master and the young man talking happily, how could he not understand that the two should have known each other for a long time? Madame Dowager celebrated her birthday every year. Why didn't he come even once? It was true that he came to celebrate Madame Dowager's birthday, but his main purpose was probably that young man. Didn't he see that the master just exchanged a few words with Madame Dowager and walked straight over there? He was probably the only person in the entire capital, or even the entire Jing kingdom, who could be called a little friend by Master Tan Yin. Who exactly was the eldest grandson of the Li family? First, he used the longevity painting to suppress Zhao Chun, and then he made Master Tan Yin lower himself to attend his birthday. Was this really the child of the Li family, who had been living outside for 20 years? As the master of the Li family, Li Mingzi was at a loss in the face of such a situation. If he neglected Master Tan Yin, it would be bad for the Li family's reputation. However, the master walked over on his own. Did he have to invite him back? At this moment Madame Dowager said, Go and invite her and the master over. Master Tan Yin was of noble status. No matter what the master thought, as a member of the Li family, it was not good to neglect him. Looking at Li Mingzi getting up and walking over, Madame Fong lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly, gritting her teeth so hard that they were about to break. She originally wanted to borrow Zhao Chun's longevity painting to make him a joke at Madame Dowager's birthday banquet. But she did not expect that it would become a stepping stone for him to become famous. It turned out to be a clumsy move, causing more people to notice him. Monk Tan Yin's appearance pushed everyone's attention to him to a new peak. If this continued, even her stubborn husband would think that he was the most suitable candidate to be the next master of the Li family. Madame Fong's face was gloomy. The current master of the Li family was her husband, and the future master of the Li family would definitely be her son. No one could take him away, not to mention Li Minggen's son. Even if Li Minghan came back to life, he could forget about it. I appreciate Assistant Minister Li's kindness. I've already delivered the gift, so I won't stay any longer. I'll take my leave now. There's no need to send me off. The old monk left with the little monk. Under everyone's gaze, he was extremely high profile. He wasn't as quiet as when he came. Here, come with me. Monk Tanin left, but Li Mingzi did not intend to let Li Yi stay here any longer. He and Madame Dowager still had a lot of questions about Monk Tanin. Rui, come with me. Li Yi grabbed Miss Lu's arm and decided to take her with him. He didn't want her to keep staring at the direction of the old monk. He was afraid that once he turned around, she would chase after him with her sword and fight with the old monk for 300 rounds in the name of learning kung fu. Li Mingzi did not say anything about this. Madame Dowager liked Mississippi Lu very much. Madame Dowager would only be happy if she went with him. The little fatty looked at Li Yi enviously. Those sitting there were all his elders. If he sat there, he could be the first to eat. Originally, he wanted to sit in the corner peacefully, but after being disturbed by the old monk and seeing the expressions on everyone's faces, Li Yi knew that he couldn't sit still even if he wanted to. Little ear, what's going on between you and Master Tanin? Sure enough, as soon as he sat down, his aunt asked with a face full of gossip. Li Yi was depressed. This question was very unprofessional. What could happen between him and an old monk? He said helplessly, nothing much. Last time when I went to Cold Mountain Temple with Grandma, I happened to meet Master Tanin. We chatted for a while, but we're not very familiar. I don't know why he came to our house. It was not convenient to tell them about the scriptures, so Li Yi could only say so. Is that really the case? The beautiful woman's face was full of disbelief. Thinking back to the situation just now, the two of them could not have just chatted. Li Yi nodded and said, that's how masters are. They like to pay attention to fate. Master Tanin once said that I have fate with Buddhism. Maybe it's because of this. The beautiful woman frowned and said, what fate with Buddhism? Big brother only has one son, so we can't cut off the line. Even Master Tanin can't do that. You should go to the temple less in the future. Your second uncle will soon transfer you to the capital, and the family has already sent someone to pick up your wife. She's already 20 years old, and she doesn't even have a child. This matter has to be settled quickly. Hearing Li Yi's words, Madame Fang's heart moved. She looked up and said, you can't say that. To be able to have fate with Master Tanin is a blessing that can't be cultivated for several lifetimes. Nephew, you have to seize this opportunity. This is also beneficial to our Li family. Madame Fang looked like she was thinking of the Li family. In her heart, she hoped that Li Yi would stay in the temple and not come back. The Li family would not let a monk be the family head. What? Li Yi ignored Madame Fang's words. The family had sent someone to Qing and prefecture to pick up Rui. When did this happen? How come he didn't know? If Rui came to the capital, what was the point of him going back? Was he going to live with Rui? Aunt Lianrong looked at Li Yi and said reproachfully, look at you. As a granddaughter-in-law, how can I not come for the old madam's 60th birthday? By the time you think about it, it's already too late. The old madam has already sent someone to Qing in prefecture. If it weren't for the rain that delayed the journey a few days ago, I'm afraid they would have arrived in the capital by now. Faced with his aunt's accusation, Li Yi was momentarily speechless. What should he say? This time, when he came to the capital, he had no intention of staying for long. He just wanted to replace the original owner of this body, to come here and have a look. After that he would go back and have children with Rui. Who would have thought that so many things would happen after he came here? His original plan was completely disrupted. Now that they had picked up Rui his own plan, what other plan could there be? Chapter 344. Master Tanyin's Dharma is profound. Even Empress Dowager praises him. You must not be disrespectful to him in the future. The old grandma warned Li Yi. A monk's behavior couldn't be judged by common sense. It was a blessing for the Li family that Master Tanin was willing to condescend to be friends with his son. He couldn't be arrogant because of this. Otherwise, he would be criticized by all his followers. Li Yi could only nod in agreement. The old grandma's words were a little late. She had already been disrespectful. Moreover, Master Tan-in, who was profound in Dharma, wasn't really above the mortal world. He ate, drank, and pooped like ordinary people. He was just a little smarter, and knew how to recite scriptures better than ordinary people. He also had desires. He hadn't finished copying the scriptures he had promised. The old monk wouldn't care about the issue of disrespect. After all, it was not a bad thing to be on good terms with Master Tan-in. The guests were still present. The old grandma didn't continue to pester them on this matter. The necessary procedures had been completed. It was time to eat. Eat more. Look at how thin you are. The old grandma put food into Mississippi Lou's bowl for her. In the entire Lee family, she was the only one who had such an honor. Except for Rui, the table was full of elders. The atmosphere was dull. It was better to sit with the little fatty. It was free and lively. She only took 2 mouthfuls of food on the plate in front of her. A steward of the Lee family hurried over and whispered a few words in second Uncle Li Ming's ear. The Crown Prince of Prince Ning sent someone to congratulate the old grandma on her birthday? Li Mingzi stood up from his seat, looking surprised. Cough. Li almost spat out a mouthful of tea. He also choked. He turned around and coughed hard. What Crown Prince? The old grandma put down her chopsticks and asked. Li Mingzi's face was full of confusion. He said, the Crown Prince of Prince Ning, the supervisor of Gyeonggi province appointed by His Majesty a few days ago. He sent someone to congratulate you. The guests at the next table stopped what they were doing. Ning Wang was the younger brother of the current emperor, and the most powerful Wang Yi in the Jing kingdom. His fief was only slightly inferior to the capital, Qing and Fu. It was enough to show how much importance the emperor placed on him. A few days ago, the Crown Prince of Ning Wang had married the daughter of the Wang family as his consort. The Wang family had been around for hundreds of years, and had gone through many dynasties to remain standing. They had a deep foundation, and were one of the most powerful and wealthy families in the entire Jing country. With such a background, the Crown Prince had actually sent someone to celebrate the birthday of the old woman of the Li family? Could it be that the Li family and Ning Wangfu also had relations? Everyone had their own guesses, but they didn't know that the head of the Li family, Li Mingzi, was also full of doubts. He didn't dare to delay, and personally went out to welcome them. A few black lines appeared on Li Yi's forehead. What was this fellow Li Xian trying to do? Did he think that this old man's birthday wasn't big enough? The only good thing was that he didn't come in person. Otherwise, he didn't know how many more interrogations he would have to face after the birthday. The Crown Prince's mansion sent a steward, which could be considered as giving enough face to the Li family. Many people were wondering who he was, and why Li Mingzi had to personally welcome him. Just when the steward's attitude was obviously respectful, news came from the other side. It's the Crown Prince of Prince Ning. How could the Li family? Although the Crown Prince of Prince Ning had not been in the public sight for long, the things related to him had left a deep impression on everyone. He married the daughter of the Wang family, was appointed as the supervisor of Gyeonggi province, and accused Chunyu of favoritism, causing him to be banished to another province. Next, the Crown Prince's mansion sent someone to celebrate the old lady's birthday. They thought they knew the Li family very well, but today they realized that the Li family seemed to be far more mysterious than they showed. The guests from the Crown Prince's mansion hadn't sat down yet when the Li family's steward walked over in a daze. He looked at Li Mingzi with a stupefied expression. Head of the family, Princess Yongla, the people from the princess's mansion. Bang. Li Mingzi was shocked, and countless chopsticks around him fell to the ground. Princess Yongla, the only daughter of the emperor and the queen, the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom, had been doted on since she was a child. She was the only princess who didn't get married after she came of age, and stayed in the palace. She was a real member of the royal family. Was this still the Li family that they knew was declining? Even when the Li family was at its peak, it didn't have such a great reputation. Li put down his chopsticks and covered his face with his hands. Finally, he figured out what the strange smiles on their faces meant when they parted. Li had mixed feelings. The princess said she had a way to solve the problem the Li family was facing. She promised that after Li left, no one would dare to make trouble for the Li family. Was this the way? The Li family's trouble was much smaller. The crown prince and the princess sent gifts on the birthday of the old Li family, which was a very obvious signal for outsiders. The Li family was protected by the crown prince and the princess. Whoever wanted to make trouble for the Li family had to think about whether they could afford to offend such a powerful force at the same time. After the birthday banquet, the task of explaining to the whole family fell on him. The people from the crown prince's mansion and the princess's mansion came together. Even the old grandma couldn't sit still. When did the Li family have a relationship with them? Not only the guests were curious, but even the old grandma was very curious. This shocked them even more than Master Tan. You too. I wonder if the crown prince and the princess. The two people from the crown prince's mansion and the princess's mansion obviously had an appointment. Li Mingzi looked at them, but he was interrupted by the young man from the princess's mansion before he could finish his words. We're just following orders. The two princes have told us not to disturb the old grandma's birthday banquet. Assistant Minister Li and the old grandma don't need to mind us. The confusion and surprise in Li Mingzi's heart were about to reach the peak. Master Tan, the crown prince of Prince Ning, and Princess Yongla. These three people had no connection with the Li family, but they all appeared tonight. What's more, they acted in unison. They only sent gifts and told him not to mind. How could he not mind? Among these people, which one of them could be offended by the Li family? Li, can I have a word with you? Just when Li Mingzi was at a loss, he saw the man from the princess's mansion step forward and speak to a young man behind the crowd. Yeah. Li Mingzi looked back at Li, then at the two people in front of him. After a short moment of surprise, a trace of understanding suddenly appeared on his face. Second uncle, grandma, I'm leaving for a while, Li said awkwardly and walked towards a secluded corner. The steward of the crown prince's mansion and the man from the princess's mansion all followed. There are still many things we don't know about him, the old grandma murmured as she watched the three people leave. Seeing this scene, everything that happened tonight could be explained. Master Tan, the crown prince of Prince Ning, and Princess Yongla. These people clearly had no connection with the Li family. Why did they appear at her birthday banquet? She knew too little about this grandson, whom she had met for the first time in 20 years. Chapter 345. After experiencing so many things at this moment, what the guests were thinking about had nothing to do with the birthday banquet. They didn't expect the Li family to be so secretive. They didn't know when they had the support of the royal family. That eldest grandson who had left home for 20 years seemed to have a good relationship with the crown prince, and even the princess. What happened that year? Was it really just the eldest son of the Li family eloping with someone else? Were there other secrets? After tonight, what would the Chen family, who had a grudge against the Li family, do? Was the Li family behind the banishment of the capital's magistrate, Chen Yu? What happened tonight was too shocking and far exceeded their expectations. The guests were brainstorming. The face of the master's wife, Madame Fong, had turned from gloomy to pale. Her nephew, who had no background, suddenly had the support of the crown prince and the princess. She had originally looked down on them, but now she had to look up to them. The psychological difference was so great that it was like falling from heaven to hell. Even if she had the support of her maiden family, she still felt a deep sense of helplessness. When Madame Fong was in a trance and sat on her seat with lifeless eyes, the guard of the princess's residence looked at Li with a smile and asked, "The princess asked me to ask Li, is the gift from the princess's residence to Li's satisfaction?" Li had to admit that although Li Xian and Mingzhu's actions would bring him some trouble, it was the most suitable method. Ever since he saw the Chen family's daughter that day, Li knew that there was no turning back for the Chen family and the Li family. He could return to Qing'an Prefecture, and the Li family's hands would not be able to reach there. However, the Li family in the capital would have to face the House of Duke's revenge. The difference in power between the two families was too great. The Li family would not be the last one to persevere. A crown prince and a princess should be enough to make the Chen family afraid. The bigger the family, the more scruples they had. They would not offend someone they could not afford to offend just for this matter. Now that his worries had been resolved, Li looked at the man and asked, "What else did the princess say?" The man smiled and said, "The princess also said that it is impossible to fulfill all the rewards that Li wants, but a discount is still possible." "Discount?" Li was puzzled. "What do you mean?" "This, Her Highness didn't say." The man shook his head and said, "His Highness only said these 2 sentences. As for the rest, Li will ask His Highness next time." While he was pondering over what Emingzi meant, there was a sudden commotion in front of him. In the next moment, most of the guests stood up. Li's eyebrows twitched. "No way again?" He counted with his fingers. Other than the old monk, Li Xian and Emingzi, he really didn't know anyone else in the capital. Since there was such a big commotion in front of him, could it be that the Chen family came to make trouble? Unless the Chen family was crazy, the dignified state duke wouldn't do such a shameful thing. Thousands of thoughts went through Li Yi's mind. When he heard that sharp and thin voice, which was neither yin nor yang. "Where is Li Yi? Come out quickly to receive the imperial edict." His face suddenly turned pale. "It's over, everything is over. One should not be afraid of thieves stealing, but one should be afraid of thieves remembering." Being remembered by the king of a country was not a good thing. Li Yi sat down on the chair, and had the urge to let Rui take him away from this place. Without anyone's order, everyone immediately stood up from their seats, and stood on both sides to form a passage. At the end of the passage was where Li Yi was. 2 eunuchs walked along the passage with their heads held high and said in a sharp voice, "County Lieutenant Li, receive the imperial edict." Li Yi raised his head, and saw the 2 familiar eunuchs again. "What are you waiting for? Kneel down and receive the imperial edict." Li Mingzi walked over quickly and urged. The situation was not in his favor. Li could only bend his knees helplessly. Everyone present, including second uncle Li Mingzi and the old madam, knelt down with a crash. The little fatty didn't understand. He raised his head and looked around, but was quickly pressed down by his mother. The imperial edict states, Anxi County Lieutenant Li Yi improved interrogation by torture, created horseshoes, invented cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and stitched up wounds. He blessed the common people and blessed the people. He offered a divine object from heaven's punishment, defeated the Qi army, and expanded the territory. The emperor conferred upon you the title of Prince of Chang'an. You will be crowned with honor, and forever blessed by the heavens. Note, this Chang'an is not Chang'an. I really can't think of a better name. The eunuch said a lot of tongue-twisting words. Li Yi could only understand the first and the last few sentences. The gist of it was that he had done so many things before, and all the credit had been accumulated by him. This time, he would be rewarded together. He would no longer be the Anxi County Lieutenant, and no longer return to the Qing'an Prefecture. The emperor had given him a piece of land in Chang'an. From then on, Li Yi would stay there and be a small county magistrate. From then on, he would truly enter the ranks of the nobles. Chang'an and the capital were neighbors. Maybe Li Yi could see the city walls from his fief. The change from a duke to a county magistrate was not mentioned. He didn't mention tens of thousands of gold coins, or thousands of hectares of fertile land. This discount was a bit too much. At this moment Li Yi's mood calmed down. It seemed that the emperor also knew that he wasn't cut out to be an official. He just wanted him to be a parasite in society. In fact, he had long known that this day would come. He had always been unwilling to face it. This time he might not be able to avoid it. The eunuch squeezed a smile on his face and said, "County Magistrate Li, accept the imperial edict." Seeing that Li Yi didn't respond, Li Mingzi suppressed the shock in his heart. He pulled his sleeve and said in a low voice, "Don't just stand there. Accept the imperial edict." The eunuch handed the imperial edict to Li Yi respectfully and said, "His Majesty has spoken. County Magistrate Li is summoned to the palace tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, someone from the palace will be sent to pick you up." The eunuch came and went quickly. He left the Li family directly, leaving behind his nobility robe and other belongings. He also messed up Madame Dowager's birthday banquet. Now no one cared about Madame Dowager's birthday. The eldest grandson of the Li family had been conferred nobility by His Majesty. He was the county magistrate of Chang'an. The head of the Li family, Li Mingze, was also just a county magistrate. In the Jing kingdom, nobility could not be conferred without military merits. It was the first time that His Majesty had made an exception to confer nobility. What kind of luck did the Li family have? After so many years of decline, was it finally going to rise again? Everyone had heard the description in the imperial edict. They were very unfamiliar with the description. However, His Majesty was generous in praising Li Mingze's contribution. Naturally, this matter couldn't be false. Congratulations, congratulations. One family with two nobles. Congratulations, Madam Dowager. Congratulations, Assistant Minister Li. County Magistrate Li has been favored by His Majesty at such a young age. His future is limitless. When they calmed down, everyone came forward to congratulate them. Madam Dowager's smile was unprecedentedly bright. Although Li Mingze was still shocked, he couldn't hide the smile on his face. County Magistrate Li of Chang and County Magistrate Li of Chang'an, Madam Fong, who was sitting in a seat behind everyone, murmured to herself with a pale face. Chapter 346. First, it was the highly respected Buddhist master. Then it was the crown prince of Ning with a powerful background. Next, it was the noble princess of a country. Finally, even the emperor's imperial edict arrived. The eldest grandson of the Li family, who had just been appointed as the county magistrate of Chang, and by the emperor, instantly became the center of attention. No one cared about the 60th birthday anymore. Li Yi felt guilty about this, but the old woman didn't care at all. In fact, she was even happier than before. It was as if this matter was more important than her 60th birthday. This was not surprising. After the founding of the country, although the country had been in turmoil for decades, it was generally stable. It was almost impossible to rely on military merits to earn a title of nobility. At most, they would be rewarded with land. The emperor had been on the throne for more than 10 years, and had intentionally reduced the number of titles. There were very few people who were awarded titles. It was the first time in recent years that someone was awarded the title of Viscount in Jing County. The meaning behind this was self-evident. For the sake of the continuation of the Li family, the old woman couldn't give him more. She couldn't help but feel guilty. Looking at it now, how could what the Li family could give him compare to the emperor's favor? What could be better than receiving the emperor's favor? After making such a big scene at the old woman's birthday banquet, Li Yi was naturally drowned in all kinds of questions. Of course, this included what happened between him, the crown prince, and the princess. The imperial edict talked about all the contributions. And what exactly did they mean? Li Yi had only briefly explained how he had met the crown prince and the princess in Qing and Fu, and the few things he had unintentionally done. He had not expected them to be so useful to the country. As for chatting with the emperor in the garden and pulling him back from the gates of hell, for their sake, Li Yi did not mention a word about it. Li Mingze and the others only knew that Li Yi's position as county lieutenant was personally conferred by His Majesty, but they did not delve into it. The current His Majesty cherished talents, and because of one article, many poor students were granted special permission to enter officialdom. They only thought of this as one of the many. However, with the arrival of the imperial edict, everyone finally understood how much importance the emperor placed on him. He was only a 20-year-old viscount. No one knew how far he would go in the future. The Li family was still too small for him. Li Mingze thought for a moment and looked at Li Yi. I was hesitating before whether I should leave the position of master to you in the future. Now, it seems that for the sake of the Li family, it is indeed the most suitable for you to be the master of the family. Madame Fong's expression changed when she heard this, but she only lowered her head and didn't speak. Things were different now. Even if her husband gave up the position of the Li family, head to a county magistrate, who was not even 20 years old, no one in the Li family would object. Old Madame's expression did not change. She looked at Li Yi as well, obviously supporting her son's decision. At the same table, the core figures of the Li family weren't surprised by the words of the master. If a family wanted to survive and maintain its prosperity, It needed the unremitting efforts of the master of each generation. Although Li Minghan was the eldest son, he wouldn't be a good master. It could be seen from the fact that he eloped with an ordinary girl, without caring about the family. If it weren't for the painstaking efforts of the current master, the Li family would have declined a long time ago, far worse than it was now. The younger generation of the Li family, including the son of the master, didn't have any outstanding figures. They didn't have the ability to lead the Li family to glory again, and they didn't even have the ability to maintain the status quo. At this time, handing the future of the Li family to Li Yi, who was favored by the emperor and had a close relationship with the royal family, was obviously the best choice. Moreover, he was the eldest grandson of the Li family. Everything was justified. Neither outsiders nor members of the Li family had the right to criticize him. Lu Rui looked at the crowd and then at Li Yi. Seeing that the atmosphere was unusually quiet, he pulled back his chopsticks. Being stared at by everyone, Li Yi suddenly smiled and said, "Second uncle, I was born in Qing and Fu and grew up in Qing and Fu. Actually, before coming to the capital, I only wanted to wait for grandmother's birthday and then immediately return. I never thought about becoming the head of the Li family. If it weren't for the emperor's imperial edict, I would have left in 2 days at most." Madame Fong heard this and raised her head slightly. Disbelief flashed through her eyes. Li Mingzi still wanted to say something, but Li Yi said again, "I am the same as my father. We are not suited to be the master. If the Li family falls into my hands, I'm afraid it will decline even faster. Second uncle is in the prime of his life. Under your management, the Li family will not decline. As for the future, that should be the matter of Yingjie and Yingkai." Li Yi wasn't being modest. He liked to live a simple life of daily necessities. With Rui and Xiaohuan, anywhere was home. He was confident that he could live such a life well. As for being the master of a large family, he had to rack his brains and sweat for the rise and fall of the family every day. He would probably die of old age in less than 2 years. What meaning was there in such a life? It was even scarier than the mutual deception in the officialdom. To be able to manage the Li family to this extent under the pressure of Duke Chen's Fu, this second uncle of his was the most suitable person to do this. For the sake of the Li family, and for his own sake, Li Yi felt that he needed to say these words first. Madame Fong raised her head and stared dazedly at Li Yi. The shock in her eyes deepened. He had never thought about being the master of the Li family. He had never thought about taking away everything that should have belonged to him from them. If that was the case, then all the things she had done in his eyes were actually many jokes. The title of nobility, the emperor's favor, the friendship with the heir, the princess, and even great master Tanin. These things were far more important than the Li family. He could easily obtain them. It was a pity that she still deeply thought that he had designs on the Li family. After completely letting out a sigh of relief in her heart, Madame Fong lowered her head again. Her face was completely red. She wished that there was a hole in the ground to crawl into. Li Mingzi frowned slightly. Li Yi's words were very firm. Not only would he not be the master now, he would not be in the future. Heroes and talents were all mediocre. After his 100 years, the Li family's decline was already inevitable. Unless, in his lifetime, he could bring the Li family to another level. However, this matter was almost impossible in his hands. A viscount in name was far inferior to the county of Shi that the emperor had personally conferred. If his title of nobility could be raised again, the status of the Li family would also rise. However, the premise of all this was that he was willing to become the master of the Li family. Looking at Li Yi's smiling face and his unusually firm attitude, Li Mingzi didn't say anything more. This matter needed to be considered at length. Chapter 347. You haven't learned anything else, but you've completely learned your father's lazy personality. The old mistress looked at him and smiled. Forget it. Your second uncle can still stay in this position for a few more decades. It's fine if you don't want it. But don't forget, no matter what, this is your home. Looking at the old mistress's loving smile, Li felt warmth in his heart. Although he lacked the passionate affection for the Li family, the old mistress and the others treated him like family. He couldn't become the head of the Li family, but he wouldn't sit back and watch the Li family decline. No matter how grand a banquet was, it would come to an end. Late at night, the guests gradually dispersed. Li sat alone in the corridor, staring at the sky in a daze. Regarding all of this, he was more or less mentally prepared. Luckily, Rui and Xiaohuan were almost here. As long as they were here for him, whether he was in Qing and Fu or Jing City, it didn't make much of a difference. Living a carefree life was something people yearned for. No one had ever realized it. Although it was annoying to be remembered by the princess and the emperor, it wasn't without its benefits. In the past, even if he sold candied haws or bottles of Rui nectar on the street, there would be people looking for trouble. Now that he had the title of county lieutenant or county magistrate, at least he could sell candied haws and Rui nectar with peace of mind. The only difference was that the location had changed from Qing and prefecture to the capital. Unfortunately, there was still more than half a year left on the lease for Rui Workshop. If the whole family moved here, wouldn't the money be wasted? Other than that, there was also the theater that had been opened all over Qing and prefecture. The assets that he had spent half a year building were all in Qing and prefecture. Now he had to start all over again in the capital. With the title of nobility and a large mansion, there would definitely be no lack of maids and servants. At the very least, he should hire a few guards. Li felt as if he could see money being spent like water. It wasn't easy to feed so many people with the salary given by the court. Money. It had been a long time since he had a lack of money. Are we not going back? Mississippi Lu sat on the wall, swinging her legs and looking up at the sky as well. Who said that? It's just a house in the capital. You can go back whenever you want and stay as long as you want. The magistrate was not a hostage or a criminal. His personal freedom was not restricted. As long as he didn't hide in Qing and Fu and not return to the capital, there shouldn't be any problems. After we move in, I want to pick a courtyard first. After a long time, Mississippi Lu's voice came again. No problem, you can choose first. Li stood up and walked to the wall. He raised his head and said, however, in return, shouldn't you repay me a little? For example, Mississippi Lu bent her legs and narrowed her beautiful eyes. She held the hilt of her sword and looked down at him. Like what? For example, I don't have to pay you back the 50 taels of silver I owe you. Li looked at her and said, it's 100 taels, Mississippi Lu reminded. You agree? I disagree. Then there's nothing to talk about. As usual, Mississippi Lu jumped down from the wall and threw the sword in her hand to him. Make your move. Mississippi Lu was a very principled person. As long as Li Yi could defeat her, she would never say no to Li Yi's decision. Unfortunately, they had used this method many times, and Li Yi had never won even once. The next morning, a servant from the Li family came to inform him that someone from the palace had arrived. Yesterday, the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict said that he had to enter the palace this morning, but he didn't expect it to be this early. Li Yi put on the nobility robe with sleepy eyes. It fit him perfectly and looked better than the county officer's robe. The material seemed to be more exquisite as well. He left the Li family surrounded by the old mistress and the others. Until now, Li Yi knew nothing other than that he had been given the title of a county officer, and that his fief was not far from the capital, in Chang'an district. He had slept late last night after fighting with Mississippi Lu, so he was woken up early in the morning. He sat in the palanquin drowsily. The old emperor was quite considerate, and had laid out a comfortable bed in the palanquin. The only problem was that the space was a little small, and he had to curl up his legs to lie down. But at least there was a place to sleep. Not long after, Li Yi went back to sleep. The palanquin rocked rhythmically and comfortably. The swaying of the sedan chair was rhythmic and comfortable. In a daze, Li Yi only remembered that after he entered the palace, the old emperor had entrusted him with an important task and rewarded him with a lot of things. The silver was piled up like a mountain, and he was rewarded with 10 beautiful maids. In his excitement, Li Yi did his best to assist the emperor in governing the Jing kingdom, eliminating internal and external troubles, and quelling rebellions. He single-handedly facilitated the Jing kingdom to go through 2 industrial revolutions. The strength of the country was unprecedentedly strong, and its prestige subdued the four barbarians, allowing the Jing kingdom to complete an unprecedented unification. Later, before Emperor Jing died, he was conferred the title of prince with a different surname. There seemed to be something wrong. He was second only to the emperor, and above tens of thousands of people. And then he woke up. He impatiently slapped away the eunuch's hand that was shaking his shoulder, wiped off his saliva, and walked out of the palanquin. He immediately felt refreshed and had a good sleep. County Magistrate Li, we're here. The eunuch's smile was very kind. Li looked around and found that he was in a rather spacious courtyard. There was a row of rooms opposite him, and people were coming in and out frequently. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't look like the place where the emperor lived. Where is this? Li looked back at the eunuch and asked. Did he come to the wrong place? Food Distribution Bureau, the eunuch replied. Food Distribution Bureau? Li looked at the clothes of the people coming in and out, and immediately understood that this should be a place similar to the imperial kitchen. The smell coming out of the room was quite fragrant. Not bad. The old emperor actually knew how to be humane. He knew that Li Yi hadn't had breakfast, and specially asked someone to bring him to the imperial kitchen to fill his stomach. In an instant, the emperor's good impression in Li Yi's heart went up a level. Well, what kind of breakfast do you provide here? Li Yi asked a random servant. It was not easy to come to the imperial palace. The imperial chefs in the imperial palace should be almost the world's top chefs. The food they made would definitely taste good. He wanted to take this opportunity to have a good look. He just didn't know if he could take it away and let Rui and the little fatty try it when he got back. The servant who was stopped by Li Yi looked dull and didn't know how to answer. He also didn't dare to speak carelessly because he couldn't afford to offend a person wearing such clothes. Ahem, County Magistrate Li, you didn't come here to eat, the eunuch said after coughing twice. Why did you bring me here if not to eat? Li Yi frowned and asked. You're here. Hurry up and make me hot pot. A bouncing figure came in from outside. When she saw Li Yi, her eyes immediately turned into a crescent moon. Greetings, princess. When the little girl walked over, a large number of people immediately knelt down. Li Yi was now a nobleman, so he didn't need to kneel when he saw the princess. He resisted the urge to pinch her face and said, If you want to eat hot pot, go to your brother Xian's place. I still have business to attend to. I won't. Princess Shanning's little face turned and said, My royal sister and brother Xian said that your hot pot is better. County Magistrate Li. The eunuch looked at Li Yi with a smile and said, Your business is to cook for the princess. This is His Majesty's order. Li Yi's expression froze when he heard that. He asked him to get up early in the morning, just to make hot pot for this little girl? What exactly was the old emperor thinking? Was a viscount supposed to cook for the royal family? In ancient times, King Yu of Zhou used beacons to make fun of the feudal vassals for a smile, which led to the destruction of the country. Today, Emperor Jing summoned the county magistrate of Chang into the palace just for a hot pot. Such a fatuous emperor was like a second King Yu of Zhou. The Jing kingdom would be destroyed sooner or later. Chapter 348. I'm going to listen to the teacher's lecture. I'll be back in 2 hours. Don't be lazy. I want the hot pot to be ready when I come back. After Princess Shanning finished speaking, she ran out in a hurry. Several eunuchs and palace maids chased after her with pale faces. Li Yi sat on a stone bench in the courtyard with a gloomy expression on his face. Anyone who was disturbed from a good dream would not be in a good mood to come here early in the morning just to cook. The eunuch reminded him, County Magistrate Li, this is the order of His Majesty. You can't neglect the princess. All right. I got it. You can go and do your own things. Li Yi waved his hand impatiently and said. It was still early. He had 2 hours to find a place to catch up on sleep. As for cooking, he could do it in an hour. It's my duty to follow County Magistrate Li, the eunuch said with a smile. The eunuch's voice was sharp and thin. It was neither a man nor a woman. It was quite uncomfortable to listen to it. His smile was gloomy. No wonder most of the eunuchs in literary works were not good people. With such good qualities, it would be a pity if he did not become a bad person. Then take me out for a walk. Li did not plan to catch up on sleep. He had fallen asleep in the sedan, and did not have the chance to see what the palace looked like. If he did not take a day trip to the palace, he would feel sorry for waking up so early. The eunuch said with a fake smile, "I'm sorry, County Magistrate Li. You can't go anywhere except here." The palace was not a vegetable market where anyone could stroll around. Without an identity card, he would be caught by the guards within 2 steps. Well, he was disturbed from a good dream. Now he had no freedom, and his stomach was empty. Perhaps the old emperor did not think of feeding him. His impression in Li Yi's heart suddenly became negative. He got up from the stone bench and strode into a room with a fragrant smell. The eunuch did not follow him in. He knew that the county magistrate was already very dissatisfied with him. He did not dare to get into trouble again. He had been in the palace for more than a decade, but this was the first time he had seen His Majesty order a viscount around as a cook. Thunder, rain, and dew were all grace from the heavens. Why didn't His Majesty find someone else, but chose this newly appointed county magistrate? This wasn't a punishment but a grace. Li didn't think that being a cook for others was a grace. He was willing to cook for his own family. If being forced to cook was considered a grace, then who would want such a lousy grace? Finding something to fill his stomach was what he should be doing right now. On the table in the middle of the room, there were many bowls and plates, and the rich aroma was coming from there. "Sir, you can't touch the things here. You can't touch them." Just as Li Yi was about to open one to take a look, a chubby man ran over and said while huffing and puffing, "Who are you?" Li glanced at him and asked, "Lord Ju, this lowly official is still in charge of the food bureau." The man smiled apologetically. The head chef of the food bureau was also the head chef of the royal restaurant. No wonder he was so fat. It seemed that he had made a lot of money over the years. "Lord Ju, you can't touch this. This is the osmanthus cake that Consort Yin wants." Speaking of osmanthus cake, Li felt his mouth salivate. It had been a long time since he had eaten the osmanthus cake that Ruoqing made. He missed it very much. Seeing this, Lord Ju's hand reached down. The head chef's heart couldn't help but jump. He said, "Lord Ju, you can't touch it. You can't touch this either. This is for Consort Yin, and will be sent over immediately." The head chef's face was covered in a cold sweat. If he delayed Consort Yan's time, he wouldn't be able to withstand being chopped off even if he had 10 heads. Consort Yin couldn't be offended, and neither could Consort Yin. Li Yi was annoyed. He looked at the head chef and asked, "What do you have here that Consort Yin doesn't want? Quickly bring it over for me." The head chef smiled bitterly and said, "No. The food bureau was in charge of the meals in the palace. Only those consorts, princesses and princes could enjoy this privilege. He was only a head chef. Without His Majesty's edict, how could he dare to let people eat here?" The higher-ups only said that Princess Shanning's meals were taken over by someone else. They were allowed to do as they pleased here, but no one told them how. He was only a small head chef. He couldn't afford to offend either side. How could he live like this? Seeing that this Lord Ju was reaching for the next one, the head chef hurriedly said, "This is Princess Yongla's soup. Lord Ju, you mustn't." "Princess Yongla's?" Li Yi was startled. He finally met someone he could afford to offend. He straightforwardly opened the lid and used a spoon to taste it. He nodded in satisfaction and said, "The taste isn't bad. I'll take this. You can make another portion for the princess." Plop. The head chef's legs softened and he fell to the ground. This kind of soup would take at least 4 hours. How could he make it in time to make it now? Seeing that the head chef was frightened, Li comforted him. "Don't worry. I'll talk to Her Highness. It's none of your business." As expected of an imperial chef, his skill in cooking soup was probably on par with Li Yi's. Li Yi was hungry to begin with. Soon, a small bowl of soup was down his stomach. "Head Chef Han, is the princess's white fungus and lotus seed soup ready?" A clear voice sounded. A maid dressed in palace attire walked in from outside. "Yes." Li Yi wiped his mouth and replied. He pointed to the soup that was still more than half left. You, The maid saw a small bowl and spoon with traces left. She suddenly widened her eyes and said angrily, "How dare you?" The little maid gritted her teeth so hard that they were about to break. Her Highness had the habit of drinking a bowl of white fungus and lotus seed soup after practice every morning. This guy who came out of nowhere was really bold. He even dared to steal the princess's soup. "It's just a bowl of soup. Do you have to do that? Your princess used to freeload from me many times. Just take it as returning the favor of that bowl of egg-fried rice," Li Yi said indifferently. When they were in Qing'an Prefecture, a prince, a princess, and 2 members of the royal family, they had always been frequent customers of Rui Lane. Not only did they not care about the business, but they were always treated with good wine and delicious food. They would wipe their mouths and leave after eating. Her Highness was not so stingy as to drink a bowl of lotus seed soup from her. You wait for me." The maid glared at Li Yi fiercely and left angrily. The head chef got up from the ground, patted the dust off his body, and was ready to do his own business. He could see that this was a matter between this lord and Her Highness. As a small head chef, it was better for him not to intervene. Ignoring the little maid who ran out, Li Yi picked up the spoon and filled a bowl for himself. Although the white fungus and lotus seed soup was delicious, the bowl in the palace was too small. After one bowl, it couldn't even fill the bottom. Chapter 349. Clang. Gold and iron collided with each other, and sparks flew everywhere. The gray-haired old woman retreated a few steps. After stabilizing her body, she looked at the figure in front of her and said with a smile, "I'm getting old. It seems that I can no longer accompany the princess in the future." Emingzu sheathed her sword and shook her head. "Nanny, you don't have to go easy on me." The old woman shook her head with a smile and said, "Her Highness is talented and diligent in practicing. You are advancing at a rapid pace. This old woman is really no match for you." The old woman looked at the tall and obviously grown-up girl in front of her and couldn't help but sigh. 10 years had passed in a flash. The little princess who could only grit her teeth and use non-standard moves was now able to stand on her own. Even the old woman was no match for her. Princess, the white fungus and lotus seed soup has been stolen." The little palace maid ran all the way and said while panting, "Slow down, what happened?" Emingzu walked over and said softly, Just now I went to the food bureau to get the white fungus and lotus seed soup, but when I got there, the soup had already been drunk." The little palace maid covered her chest and said angrily, "Who did it?" The old woman came over and asked. It was not uncommon for the imperial harem to fight and scheme against each other, but it had never involved the princess. This was the first time such a thing had happened. The little palace maid shook her head and said, "I don't know his identity, but he said that it was the princess's way of returning the favor for the bowl of egg-fried rice." Egg-fried rice? Emingzu was stunned for a moment, then she smiled and said, "Okay, I got it. You can go now." The little palace maid nodded and watched the princess go out of the hall. When she walked towards the direction of the food bureau, a smile appeared on her face. That rude guy will definitely taste the bitterness. So bitter. After biting a lotus seed, Li Yi frowned. The chefs in the imperial palace were also careless. It was obvious that he forgot to remove the core of the lotus seed he just swallowed. "Why are you here?" A voice came from behind. Li Yi turned around, raised the bowl in his hand and gestured to her. "Do you want a bowl? It's my treat." The eunuchs in the courtyard immediately hid far away. They seemed to understand why His Majesty treated Li Xinzi differently. There were many viscounts in the capital, but he was the only one who dared to speak to the princess like this. "I only found out about Father's decision yesterday. I was going to tell you in advance, but Father sent someone to pass the decree last night. Thinking about it, it doesn't make much difference." Emingzu looked at him and said, "I will talk to Imperial Father about the Shangshi Bureau. Don't take Shanning's nonsense to heart." "Forget it." Li Yi waved his hand. In fact, he felt more relaxed this way. Cooking a few dishes and making a hot pot were much better than doing other errands. Compared with the 3 provinces and 6 ministries, or the front line of the army, Li felt that this place was more suitable for him. At least, The soup of the Shangsha Bureau was better. Li Mingzhu looked at the way he was concentrating on drinking the soup, and her heart was slightly at ease. She had originally thought that he would be dissatisfied with being forced to stay in Jing by her imperial father. But now it seemed that he didn't seem to have any resistance towards it. For some reason, after drinking 2 bowls of soup, not only did he not feel full, he felt even hungrier. I'm going to make some egg fried rice. Do you want some? Li got up and patted his butt. He looked at Emingzhu and asked. Her Highness nodded and expressed her approval of Li Yi's proposal. She hadn't eaten egg fried rice for a long time. The steward of the Food Bureau watched in amazement as this lord used white rice and eggs to quickly make 2 plates of fragrant food. He was eating with Her Royal Highness outside and began to worry about his position as the steward of the Food Bureau. It's a pity that there's no wine. Eating the egg fried rice, Her Highness looked a little regretful. Since ancient times, Li Yi had only known one person who ate egg fried rice with wine. There's no wine in the palace? Li Yi asked. Then he realized that she was talking about the liquor from Rui Distillery. There might be no shortage of good wine in the palace, but based on the current technology, it couldn't reach the level of distillation and purification. Speaking of liquor, Li Yi realized that in today's world, the only liquor production workshop was in Qing'an Prefecture. Although there were other places, they were all from Qing'an Prefecture. Naturally, the price was much higher. The capital was obviously an undeveloped treasure land. If a few liquor workshops could be opened here, it would undoubtedly be building a home on a golden mountain. Moreover, the distance between the capital and Qing'an Prefecture was so far that it wouldn't affect each other's business. Not only that, Rui Du perfume and soap could all be used as a way to make a fortune. There were many more local tycoons in the capital than in Qing'an Prefecture. How could they be afraid of not being able to support a family? To do business in this kind of place, the first thing to do was not to open a shop or build a workshop, but to curry favor. The capital was not like Qing'an Prefecture. There were nobles everywhere. A small viscount was nothing. There were at least 80 if not 100 in the capital. If one of them became jealous, Li Yi wouldn't be able to handle it. Li Yi looked at his thighs, looked at Her Highness and said, how about we partner up to do the liquor business in the capital? At that time, you can drink whenever you want and as much as you want. Regarding Li Yi's proposal, Her Highness didn't think for long before agreeing. First, it was because she did like that kind of liquor, but it could only be bought in Qing'an Prefecture. It was very rare in the capital. Second, she also knew that this business was very profitable. Even she couldn't ignore it. However, the capital was deep. It was impossible for Li Yi to make it big on his own. If he could establish a relationship with the royal family, he could avoid this worry. Whether it was for business or personal reasons, she couldn't refuse this favor. What do you need? Just tell me. Having eaten and drunk her fill, Her Highness lightly left these words before leaving. Li Yi liked her straightforward attitude. She didn't say anything unnecessary. She didn't even talk about the distribution of profits. She was definitely someone he could trust in for a long-term partnership. As for the specifics of the partnership, it wasn't urgent. He would wait until Rui and Xiaohuan arrived, and they had completely settled down. Speaking of which, the emperor had only given him a noble's robe and a token to prove his identity. Fiefdom, maids, servants, and a large mansion. Weren't these all standard requirements? Why hadn't he mentioned them? Hey, little princess, why are you here? Where are the palace maids? Interrupted by the manager's words, Li Yi turned his head and saw a girl about 6 or 7 years old standing in the courtyard. She was dressed in palace attire. The little girl's attire was clearly not ordinary. She held a doll in her arms. It had a baby face and a blank expression. Her eyes were big, clear, and bright, but there was no spirit in them. She didn't speak and stared straight into the room. Little princess, it's not time to eat yet. If you want to eat anything, just let me know. I'll send someone to bring it to you. The emperor was very strict with these little princesses and princes. There was even a fixed time for meals. The manager didn't dare to break the rules. Hearing the manager's words, the little girl didn't say a word. She turned and walked out with the doll in her arms. Chapter 350. Li Yi pointed at the little girl's back and turned to look at the steward of the food bureau. Which princess is this? He only knew two of the old emperor's princesses, the beautiful constable Princess Yongla and the arrogant Princess Shaning. He didn't know any of the princes. The little girl who looked a little silly just now was actually a princess? Lord Ju, that is Princess Yongning. The steward immediately replied. Li Yi realized that there was a huge gap between princesses. For example, Shou Yang, the Tsundere Lolita, might be the most pampered type. In order to satisfy her desire to eat hot pot, the old emperor did not hesitate to let a viscount enter the palace to be the chef. As for the lonely Princess Yongning, she might be the least pampered type. Li Yi turned his head and saw the corner of a robe peeking out from the stone steps at the entrance. Li Yi walked out slowly and saw the little girl sitting by the stone steps, hugging the doll in her arms. She was motionless and looked ahead with a blank expression. Coo! A strange noise was suddenly heard. Li Yi lowered his head to look at her, then walked back to the food station. When he came out again, he was holding a small bowl of egg-fried rice that was still steaming hot. As if she smelled the fragrance, the little girl turned her head and looked straight at Li Yi. For the first time, there was a glimmer of light in her bright eyes. Eat. This was the first time Li Yi saw an hungry princess. He squatted down and passed the bowl to her. The little girl instinctively dodged his action. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any ill intentions, she put the doll aside after a long time. She reached out to take the bowl and took small bites. Li Yi sat beside the little girl. The steward walked out and was about to say something when he was glared at by Li Yi. Just like that, one big and one small sat on the porch. One ate quietly while the other stared ahead in a daze. Hey, is my hot pot ready? A crisp voice pulled Li Yi back from his dazed state, and a tsundere little face appeared in front of him. Hot pot. Li Yi was confused. What hot pot? The Lolita's face turned from red to green. The taste of the hot pot depended on the base. There was no Haidaleo in this world. Fortunately, it was easy to make a homemade hot pot base and didn't require much effort. The palace was a palace after all. Tender green vegetables weren't rare here. The variety of dishes wasn't something the prince's residence could compare to. Shou Yang Princess followed Li Yi like a shadow, asking him questions from time to time. It looked like she wanted to secretly learn from him. It was very noisy outside. The arrogant Lolita did not come alone. The princes and princesses were all attracted by the hot pot she mentioned. After the morning class, they followed behind her and swarmed over. A large group of eunuchs and palace maids guarded them. It seemed that His Majesty the Emperor was quite energetic when he was young, Li Yi thought to himself. He glanced outside and could not help but frown. At the door, a few princes and princesses surrounded the little girl and pushed her. The little girl didn't resist and just stood there in a daze, letting them bully her. Can you teach me how to make hot pot? That way, I can make delicious food for father and mother. Princess Shaning dipped her chopsticks in the hot pot and tasted it. She nodded in satisfaction and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi pointed outside and said, If you can stop them from bullying Yongning, I'll teach you. Princess Shaning was stunned for a moment. She didn't even hesitate and walked out with large strides. Among the group of princes and princesses, the proud Lolita was obviously the big sister. After a while she came back from outside. Li Yi glanced at them and saw that the group had already dispersed. The little girl, who was a little demented, was led out by two palace maids. Is that little girl really a princess? Li Yi asked while he was busy cooking. Yes, Princess Shaning immediately replied. Between princesses one couldn't be compared. Shaning and Yongning were different by a word. One was the Imingzu in the palm of the old emperor, while the other could only be bullied by many princes and princesses. Thinking of the little girl's behavior just now, Li Yi asked again. Does she not know how to speak? No. Princess Shaning shook her head and said, Yongning used to know how to speak, but she fell seriously ill a year ago. The imperial doctors almost couldn't save her. I don't know what happened later, but she recovered. Since then, I haven't seen her speak much. Yongning's mother passed away early. She never played with us. My brothers and sisters don't like her. Princess Shining was very willing to talk to people who were willing to cook for her. You don't like her either? Li Yi put the onion and ginger slices into the pot and asked casually. The proud Lolita was silent for a while and said, Father said that a family should help each other. Yongning is also my sister. It's not that I don't like her, but she never talks to me. I can't do anything about it. Li Yi looked at Princess Shining with slight surprise. A 10-year-old girl could say something like this. It meant that the old emperor had educated her well. Although this little girl was a little proud, she wasn't bad at heart. It wasn't easy for a princess to grow up in the palace. The imperial court of the Li family continued the glory of the former Tang dynasty. The princesses of that era were extravagant and lascivious. They bullied the kind-hearted, raised handsome men, and even caused chaos in the palace. Even revolts were not uncommon. Perhaps the imperial family of the Jing kingdom had learned their lesson and paid attention to the quality education of the imperial family's children. The arrogant little Lolita was even more so a pure white lotus that had emerged from the mud. She was born into the royal family, so it was normal not to be arrogant. Li Yi's curiosity about Princess Yongning ended there. She lost her mother at a young age and suffered from a serious illness. It was normal for her to be autistic in a place like the palace where there wasn't much human touch. Li Yi had a friend with autism in his previous life. When he was in elementary school, she was a weak girl who never communicated with others. She just sat in her seat and stared blankly. As her deskmate, it took Li Yi half a semester to walk into her heart and become her only friend. She was his first friend of the opposite sex. Although she was transferred to another school by her parents in the second semester, Li Yi had a deep impression of her. That little girl who ate egg-fried rice without saying a word with a wooden expression easily evoked some of the precious memories buried deep in his heart. The beginning of spring had passed, and the weather was getting warmer. However, it was still a little chilly. Eating hot pot in such weather was a good choice. Hot pot was a very magical thing. In the future, not only was it popular in China, but it was also very popular in Japan, Europe, and America. From ancient to modern, Chinese to foreign, as long as one ate it once, it was not easy to get rid of it. It was very obvious that eating this would cause one to become addicted. The princes and princesses huddled around the stove and made a big fuss. Even though they were scalded, they still kept stuffing the food into their mouths. The officials of the Foodstuff Bureau looked at each other in dismay. When had the food from the Foodstuff Bureau been so loved by these ancestors? Chapter 351. The princes and princesses were eating noisily, which annoyed Li Yi, but he couldn't reprimand them. Li Yi cleaned his hands and walked out to the courtyard. A trace of doubt emerged in his mind. Did the old emperor really ask him to come to the palace just to make him cook? At this moment, the eunuch stepped forward and said with a smile, "County Li, the morning court has ended. Follow me to see His Majesty." Sure enough, although he was very free, the emperor should not be so free. Li Yi also wanted to see what the old emperor had up his sleeve. The effeminate eunuch took out a token from his sleeve and handed it to Li Yi, saying, "County Li, keep this token. It is the proof of entering the palace. With it, you can enter and leave the palace freely." Li Yi took the shining token and felt it sink in his hand. He couldn't help but think, this thing is actually made of gold? No wonder the royal family is so generous. A token is made of pure gold. If I have a few more, won't I become rich? At this moment, most of his attention was on the golden token, and he didn't notice that the eunuch beside him bowed even more when he saw the golden token. The security in the palace was really tight. The eunuch's name, identity, and physical characteristics were engraved clearly on the token. The possibility of it being a fake was too small. After putting away the token, Li Yi turned around and saw the eunuch's flattering smile. He frowned and opened his mouth to say something, only to remember that he didn't know the eunuch's name. "What's your name?" The eunuch smiled and said, "Lord Ju, you can call me Wei Zhong." "Wei Zhong?" Li Yi was stunned and blurted out, "Who is Wei Zhongxian to you?" The eunuch looked puzzled, then shook his head and said, "Wei Zhongxian? I've never heard of him." Li found it funny. Even if they were in the same time and space, there was a difference of hundreds or thousands of years. Moreover, they were in different worlds. How could there be any connection? Wei Zhong. What are your orders, Lord Ju? Li Yi looked at the eunuch's feminine smile, and couldn't help but shiver. He had goosebumps and said, "Don't smile in front of me in the future." Wei Zhong was speechless. The imperial palace was really huge. There were all kinds of palaces that Li Yi had never even heard of before. There were countless arches and corridors. If it wasn't for Wei Zhong leading the way, he would definitely get lost. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, his field of vision suddenly widened. The occasion to meet the old emperor was not grand at all. It was not even in the palace or the study. He walked into a garden full of evergreen trees, walked past two groups of imperial bodyguards with stern faces, and went up to a pavilion. Then he saw Emperor Jing in a yellow robe. Compared to when he was in Ning Wangfu, Jingdi's complexion was worse, but there were more smiles on his face. He was obviously in a good mood. The county magistrate of Chang, Li Yi, greets your majesty. Seeing these emperors and imperial concubines, there was one thing that was particularly bad. They often had to kneel down. The bluestone slabs in the pavilion were expensive and uncomfortable. Fortunately, Li Yi's knees only touched it slightly. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "No need to be so polite. Get up." Emperor Jing was a kind person. Although he was the ruler of a country, at least in Li Yi's view, he didn't give people too much pressure when facing him. Emperor Jing sat on a stone stool covered with a cushion. He pointed to the seat opposite him and said, "Sit." There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. The ruler of a country should have some majesty. Being so polite, Li Yi was really not used to it. Could it be that as soon as he sat down, a group of imperial guards jumped out from the side, pulled out their swords, and pointed at him to punish him for being disrespectful? Emperor Jing looked at him and said with a smile, "Why? Scholarly, who dared to say fart in front of me, doesn't even dare to sit now?" Li Yi thought in his heart. If he had known that he was the emperor of the Jing kingdom, he would have run away as far as possible. He wouldn't have invited him to eat that piece of pastry in the spirit of sharing, and today's matter wouldn't have happened. It was all that piece of pastry's fault. "Thank you, your majesty." Since the old emperor said so, Li Yi had to sit down. The scene in front of him was very familiar. It seemed that when the two of them met, it was also in such an environment. Everything that happened today originated from the secret garden in Prince Ning's mansion, from that piece of sinful pastry. Seeing Li Yi sit down, Emperor Jing pointed to the table in front of Li Yi and said, "Try this white fungus and lotus seed porridge. See how the imperial chefs in the palace compare to Prince Ning's mansion." Li Yi's heart was beating like a drum. This was not right. Were all the emperors in the feudal society like this? Did he summon him to the palace this time just to treat him to a meal? As the saying goes, being in the king's company is like being with a tiger. Shouldn't the emperors kill the whole family and execute 9 generations if they don't like it? Who is this kind of enthusiastic and hospitable uncle next door? He looked down at the food on the table. The fragrance assailed his nostrils. If he hadn't been full just now, he would have had a big appetite. But the problem was that he had eaten so much just now, he couldn't eat anymore. Wei Zhong, who was standing outside the pavilion, lowered his head, but his attention was always on the pavilion. At this moment his face was pale, and his legs and stomach were trembling. He racked his brain to recall if he had offended Li Xianzi in any way today. If he had, he would risk his life to save it. Yes, Li Xianzi didn't seem to like him smiling. In the future, he couldn't smile in front of him even if he died. The emperor was a temperamental animal. Who knew if he would turn hostile in the next moment, even if he was smiling now? Li Yi had to pick up the white fungus lotus seed porridge in front of him, and took a sip. The porridge was delicious, really delicious. But he had just drunk most of the white fungus lotus seed soup from Her Royal Highness, and eaten a plate of egg fried rice. No matter how delicious the porridge was, he couldn't drink it anymore. Not to mention, white fungus lotus seed porridge. How is it? Jing Emperor asked with a smile. The heat is just right. Li Yi felt bitter in his heart, but he still had to keep a smile on his face. Jing Emperor seemed to be in a good mood. He picked up the chopsticks and ate. He drank 2 bowls of porridge in a row, which stunned Li Yi on the opposite side. The old man standing behind Jing Emperor showed a smile on his face. At this time, the emperor didn't have any burden on his shoulders, just like that time in Prince Ning Mansion. The horseshoes, the divine punishment, and the words he unintentionally said were all deeply in the emperor's heart. The boy on the opposite side was really a guy who was good at creating miracles. The emperor once said, "Li Yi alone is worth thousands of troops and horses." This sentence seemed to be exaggerated, but everything he did was seen by Changde. He was like a lucky star who could always solve the emperor's problems in time. Especially in this battle of defending the border, it was the biggest achievement the emperor had made since he was on the throne. In the secret letter, General Su Dingyuan praised the divine punishment very much and almost attributed all the military achievements to the divine punishment. The emperor's prestige in the imperial court reached the peak of more than 10 years. The local magnates who had been restless also settled down. The envoys of the Qi kingdom were already on the way. This was the first time in decades that the Jing kingdom had taken the initiative in the struggle with the Qi kingdom. It would be recorded in history forever. Chapter 352. Accompany me to eat. Accompany me to drink. Accompany me to sleep. Of the 3 companions, Li Yi was only the first. As the ruler of a country, he could ask anyone to eat with him with just a word. Why did he choose him? Li Yi was already very full, but he still had to force himself to finish the white fungus and lotus seed porridge in front of him. He picked up some food with his chopsticks. Fortunately, the old emperor had not eaten his fill in the morning and seemed to have a good appetite. Most of the food on the table went into his stomach. After a while, it seemed that he was finally full. Emperor Jing put down his chopsticks, and the eunuch standing to the side quickly handed him a yellow silk handkerchief. Emperor Jing used it to wipe his mouth and suddenly asked, "Do you have any dissatisfaction with me for letting you come to the capital from Qing'an Prefecture? I am indebted to your majesty to be made the magistrate of Chang'an County. It is a matter that brings honor to the family. I am not dissatisfied." Even if he was dissatisfied, he could not say it so bluntly. The old emperor's question was basically a useless question. Of course, this sentence could only be thought by Li Yi. "I know that you are lazy and unwilling to participate in the disputes of the court. I promise you that I will not involve you. Thus, I will only give you the title of nobility and not increase your rank." Emperor Jing stood up and said, "This is the land of the Jing kingdom. What is the difference between Qing'an and Jingdou? You are a rare pillar of talent. Everything you have done in the past 6 months has not solved my urgent needs. If you cannot be used by the country, it would be a great regret." Li Yi was a little ashamed. Compared to others, he lacked national pride and national honor. But this could not be blamed on him. His soul came from another world. He was not a citizen of the Jing kingdom. Even though he had integrated into the current society and accepted it, the deep-rooted things in his bones could not be easily changed. Moreover, the difference between a person's strength and the resistance he might face was too great. There is no suitable position for you in the imperial court, but if you are left idle at home, it will be a waste of talent. I believe that you do not want to be idle. When Emperor Jing walked out of the pavilion, Li Yi could only follow. After a pause, he said, "The Directorate of Imperial Academy has a high opinion of the new algorithm. Since you are quite accomplished in mathematics, why don't you go to the palace and teach the princesses and princes about mathematics? They always complain that the lessons taught by teacher are obscure and difficult to understand. You should have a better way." Li Yi really wanted to say that he was very willing to do nothing. He could just be a parasite in the country. What was the point of teaching mathematics? His students were either princesses or princes. It would definitely not be easy to discipline them. Why did he have to make things difficult for himself? However, the old emperor was obviously announcing the truth and not asking for his opinion. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only keep his opinion to himself. The princess and the princes are still young, and they are stubborn and mischievous. It's not easy to discipline them. Just treat them as students, and when the time comes, do as you please. Do as I please? These words could be interpreted in any way. Coming from the mouth of the emperor, it meant that Li Yi, as a mathematics teacher, had a lot of authority. If any prince disobeyed him, he could punish him by standing and slapping his palms. These were all do as I please. Standing with the emperor was a very stressful thing, even though he was very approachable and did not put on airs like an emperor. Fortunately, the old emperor was very busy and did not have so much time to waste here with him. Maybe he only took out a part of his lunch time. Being a teacher for the princes and princesses was something that Li Yi did not expect. However, he only needed to teach them 5 times a month, and each time was only for 2 hours. The working conditions were quite good. For Li Yi, who had rich work experience, it was not that difficult to accept. Of course, this time it was not for free, and he was paid. County Magistrate Li Yi, let me see you out of the palace. Wei Zhong expressionlessly led the way for Li Yi with a straight face. Li Yi did not understand why the man, who had been smiling just now, suddenly had such an expression. Finally, when they were about to walk out of the palace, he could not help but ask, Eunuch Wei, you have been wearing a straight face all the way here. Do you have a problem with me? Wei Zhong's body trembled when he heard this, and his face revealed a terrified expression. He said, County Magistrate Li, didn't you tell me not to smile in front of you? The poor eunuch was about to cry in his heart. When had he ever met such a difficult person to please? He could not smile, but he could not smile either. In front of him, he had to be more careful than in front of the emperor. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He just said it casually. He didn't expect this guy to take it seriously. He waved his hand and said, Forget it. I was just saying. Don't take it seriously. Laugh if you want. Although he did not look good when he smiled, it was much better than wearing a straight face, as if he would stab people in the back at any time. When he entered the palace, he was carried in a sedan chair, but he had to walk back by himself. Wei Zhong had wanted to call a sedan chair for Li Yi at the gate of the palace, but Li Yi refused. Touching his swollen belly, Li Yi felt that it was better for him to walk back. This time, he had gained something from entering the palace. He was suddenly conferred a title of nobility and granted land without saying anything else. He had always felt a little uneasy in his heart. Now the worries in his heart were gone. He just had to go to the palace every few days and resume his old business. At the same time, he could catch up with Her Highness, talk about business cooperation, and freeload on the food in the palace. His life was quite happy, and when he walked into the gate of the Li family to digest the food, and bumped into a man who was coming toward him, his life reached the peak of happiness. An extremely surprised expression appeared on Li Yi's face. He asked, Feng, why are you here? Have Rui and Xiaohuan arrived? Feng was also surprised. The next moment, he gave Li Yi a big bear hug and patted him hard on the shoulder. When Li Yi was almost out of breath, he let go of him and said with a grin, Yes, we just arrived in the capital. If it hadn't been for the rain, we would have arrived a few days ago. By the way, why are you here? Where are Rui and Xiaohuan now? It's such a long way. I was worried about Miss and Xiaohuan coming to the capital, so I followed them. If something really happened, it would be more convenient for a man to help. Feng said with a silly smile. We just arrived not long ago. Madam is talking to Miss. If little aunt hadn't told him yesterday, Li still wouldn't have known that the old madam had also brought them here. At this moment, he couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. Led by a servant of the Li family, he quickly walked towards the old madam's residence. Son-in-law. Just after passing through a moon door, a thin figure trotted over from the front. Li reached out and caught the little servant girl who rushed over. Inside the room, a familiar figure came out. Chapter 353. He rubbed Xiaohuan's head out of habit. It had only been half a month, but the familiar action felt a little rusty. The most caring person was his maid. Just looking at her made him feel happy. Li carried her up and spun her around. The maid was so shy that she couldn't even lift her head. He pinched her little face and asked, Did you not eat well these days? How did you lose so much weight? Really? The maidservant's eyes curved into crescent moons, and 2 shallow dimples appeared on her face. She had some baby fat, and always hoped to become as thin as Miss and Second Mississippi. She wanted to have the sharp chin that the son-in-law liked. Really? He stretched out his finger and tapped on her forehead. He looked up at the woman who was walking towards them. The two looked at each other and smiled. There were thousands of words that they wanted to say. "Ear is back." The old mistress walked out with a smile and said, "Why are you standing outside? Come in quickly." As she spoke, her eyes did not move away from Rui. Obviously, the old mistress was very satisfied with this granddaughter-in-law. Lee saw a hairpin that he had never seen before on Rui's head. It was not new either. It was very likely that it was a gift from the old mistress. It was the old mistress's habit to give gifts whenever there was a disagreement. Anything valuable would be given. This was the old mistress's way of expressing her love. "Son-in-law, did you really become a viscount?" As the old mistress held Rui's hand and spoke, Fong sat next to Li and asked mysteriously. Li casually threw the waist token to him. Fong looked at it again and again, but could not figure out anything. Although he was illiterate, he believed what the son-in-law said. Life was really unpredictable. Half a year ago, he was a poor scholar that he personally kidnapped up the mountain. In a blink of an eye, he had become a noble in the capital. When he thought back, he felt a little sad. "Don't go back to the capital this time. Ear has been conferred a noble title by His Majesty, and will soon settle down here. The two of you should think about having children." The old mistress brought up the past again. She couldn't wait to have a great-grandson the next day. Rui blushed. After Madame Dowager finished speaking, she ordered a maid to open a small box on the table. She took out all the bracelets and hairpins and tried them one by one. In the courtyard, a few maids gathered together and whispered to each other. From time to time, they would poke their heads out to look inside. "I heard that young master's wife is here." "What do you mean by heard?" "He's talking to the old madam inside right now. Young master is a man of striking appearance. I wonder what young master's wife looks like." "That goes without saying. Just look at the Second Mississippi. How bad can the two sisters be?" I saw it just now. Young master's wife and young master are a good match." Unfortunately, we won't have the chance. Since Madame Dowager's birthday banquet last night, young master, who had just returned to the Li family, became an influential figure in the Li family again. It was said that because of young master, Prince Ning's son and Princess Yongla both sent people to congratulate Madame Dowager. Master Sandalwood from the Cold Mountain Temple even came in person and presented gifts. Many people said that young master's handwriting was better than Zhao Chun's. They didn't know who Zhao Chun was, but they knew that young master was much better than they thought. Of course, the most shocking thing was that His Majesty conferred a viscount title on young master, which was the same as the old master. However, young master was still so young. Li couldn't live in his viscount mansion today. Although he wanted to, according to the rules, he had to wait until someone from the palace came to inform him. In the afternoon, he brought Rui to meet his grandma's family. They didn't know that he had become a viscount yet. After living in the capital for decades, he suddenly had to leave. Of course, he couldn't say that he didn't feel sad. The old man didn't seem to care whether he left or not. He just held Rui's hands tightly, choking with sobs and unable to say a word. Lies couldn't be kept for long. Every time he avoided a certain question, the old man seemed to realize something. He became silent more and more often. At night, they returned to the Li family. The four of them stayed in the small yard, which finally looked like a home again. The little maid obviously had a lot to say. After she opened her mouth, she didn't stop talking. Most of the things that happened in Qing and Prefecture in the half a month after Li left. In the top courtesan competition of the Lantern Festival, Lu Xiaoqiao finally won first place. However, the most famous one was Zheng Zumo, the former top courtesan of the Jade Yard. A gifted scholar with the same name as the son-in-law wrote many poems for her. Many people offered sky-high prices just to see her. However, she had already redeemed herself and disappeared in Qing and Prefecture. The goddess of Luo Shui became a legend. This matter was probably the entertainment headline of Qing and Prefecture during this time. Even Xiao Huan had heard of it. Of course, what interested her most was the gifted scholar with the same name as the son-in-law. Li was very surprised that Zheng Zumo had redeemed herself for him. However, thinking about it this way, all her actions had a reasonable explanation. That was before the top courtesan competition, she had already planned to redeem herself. She didn't want to increase her fame at all, because the price of redeeming herself would be higher. Li was a little embarrassed. He had good intentions, but he almost ruined her big event. Li felt that she must have scolded him a lot behind his back. However, she had actually left Qing in prefecture. The chance of seeing her again in the future was very slim. Thinking of this, an inexplicable sense of loss appeared in Li Yi's heart. The young servant girl continued. Also, that old storyteller gave a lot of money to our family. Old Sun's dream of opening theaters all over the world had progressed to an unknown stage. Before he left, he had told him not to be too eager to expand. Steady progress was the best way. In the future, it wouldn't be convenient for him to write scripts. On a whim, he wanted to develop a similar entertainment industry in this world. However, this plan had been disrupted by this trip to the capital. He would leave all of this to old Sunday. The old man was in good spirits. It looked like he could still struggle for many years. As for what would develop in the end, he would have to wait and see. The business of Qing and prefecture had to be managed by someone he could trust. If the business in the capital started, no matter if it was the partnership with Ning Wangfu with Rui Nectar, hard liquor, or the brothel, they would all seem less important. It would be better to invest them all in other areas. Perhaps he would have to personally go back once for this matter. Most of the things that Xiao Huan said were actually related to him. As for the change of prefect in Qing and prefecture, and the issuance of some new government decrees, these things didn't seem so important. There was one thing that was very important. Last time, he had been delayed because he had rushed to the capital. This time, no reason could be an obstacle. The journey was tiring for the young servant girl. As Xiao Huan spoke, she leaned on his arm and fell asleep. Li carefully lifted her up and placed her on the bed in the room. He covered her with the blanket and closed the door to leave. He was prepared to complete the unfinished big event in his life. When he walked into the courtyard, he happened to see Rui being pulled back into her room by Mississippi Liu. She said that the sisters hadn't seen each other for half a month and had a lot to talk about. It was normal for sisters to have deep feelings. Li gritted his teeth and glared fiercely at the courtyard next door. He made up his mind. The money he owed to Mississippi Liu, he wouldn't return it even if he was beaten to death. Chapter 354. Duke Chen Residence. Li Minghan has passed away. The grudge between the Chen and Li family ends here. In the future, do not act against the Li family or target Li Mingza, and do not use the Chen family's resources in court. The eldest son of the current Duke Chen, and the true leader of the Chen family, Chen Qing, spoke to his gloomy-faced younger brother, Chen Chong, the county magistrate of Chong and Li Minggan's son. Hearing the news, Chen Chong's gloomy face was still filled with disbelief. Then a trace of anger appeared. It's just a county magistrate. Why should our Chen family be afraid of him? If only things were so simple, Chen Qing said gravely. But this is the first instance of His Majesty conferring a noble title in recent years, leaping from a commoner to a noble in the capital. I heard that on the day of the Li family's matriarch's birthday banquet, Prince Ning and Princess Yongla both sent congratulatory gifts. Do you really think that there is no connection between these matters? The Chen family's decades of glory had relied on the emperor's grace. In reality, whether it was the marquis or the dukes, which noble family in the capital was not like this? Whether it was glory or poverty, it all depended on the decision of the imperial family. For the Chen family, a county magistrate or even a marquis was nothing, but they could not ignore the thoughts of the emperor. A county magistrate conferred a title was not just a small viscount. For His Majesty to ignore the objections of the court officials, how important must he be in His Majesty's heart? It was not worth the emperor's displeasure for a little personal grudge. I understand. Chen Chong clenched his fists and could only sigh helplessly. The grudge with the Li family was a personal grudge. If it negatively affected the entire Chen family, because of a personal grudge, he would become a sinner of the family. Walking out of the room, Chen Chong let out a long sigh. A deep sense of helplessness surged from the bottom of his heart. When he saw the woman sitting in the garden, the helplessness on his face immediately disappeared and turned into a smile. He slowly walked over and said, "In a few days when the weather is good, let's go out for a walk. If you stay in the residence for too long, you will probably feel suffocated." The woman had a head of white hair and looked to be in her early 30s. She was originally staring ahead in a daze, but when she heard this, she returned to her senses. A faint smile appeared on her face as she said, "It's been more than 10 years. It's indeed a bit depressing. It's good to listen to second brother." Hearing this, a hint of joy appeared on Chen Chong's face. "I will arrange it immediately." The woman nodded with a smile, but the light in her eyes was still a little lacking. The sudden appearance of a noble was something that all the influential families in the capital had to pay attention to. It was especially so when they found out that they knew nothing about the county magistrate of Chang'an. It was as if he had appeared out of thin air and suddenly gained the favor of the emperor. Everyone was shocked and surprised. The officials in the court were naturally opposed to this. Almost all the nobles in the capital had obtained their titles during the founding of the country. From then on, it was harder than ascending to the heavens to be conferred a title. Many old officials had worked hard their whole lives and still could not obtain such a special honor. Prestige was only for one generation and could not be passed on to the children and grandchildren. How could a young man with no contributions be conferred a title? The emperor's action would chill the hearts of many officials in the court. However, everyone's opposition was suppressed by the emperor. A few of the big shots in the court also chose to remain silent. Even the censors did not submit a memorial, which made everyone feel that something was wrong. The emperor would not confer a title for no reason. The only possibility was that the county magistrate of Chang and had made enough contributions to be conferred a title. At such a young age, he had accomplished something that many old officials could not do in their entire lives. There was no way to verify this, and the emperor would not explain it in detail to them. It seemed that they could not get any useful information from the county magistrate of Chang'an. This was because the county magistrate was not like the other nobles. After being conferred a title, he did not invite other nobles, nor did he hold any banquets. He was so low-key that it made people's hair stand on end. The only thing they knew was that he was the eldest grandson of the Li family, and the family of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. That was all. Li Xianzi, who was in the eye of the storm, had no time to care about this. He had just moved into his new home today. The county magistrate's mansion was actually not far from the capital city. Although one could not see the city wall from the doorstep, it could be considered as within the second ring road of the capital city. According to the eunuch who led the way, the mansion had just been built by the emperor's order by the Ministry of Works. It could not be more new. The conferment of a title was not just a title. The viscount's mansion, fief, tenants, maids, servants, and even guards were all included in the conferment package. Not long after they left the capital city, they entered the territory of Chang'an County. After walking along the official road for less than an hour, a magnificent mansion could be seen from afar. A group of maids and servants stood in 2 rows. When the crowd approached, they immediately bowed and said respectfully, "Welcome back, sir." Xiao Huan was startled. She grabbed Li Yi's sleeve and looked at these people curiously. Even when Li Yi was the county magistrate, she had never seen such a grand scene. Fang stood there in a daze and looked at the scene in front of him with envy. Hordes of maids, beautiful wives and concubines, and a large mansion. Wasn't this the life he dreamed of? The little girl Duan Wu also held her mother's hand tightly and looked at the gate of the Viscount's mansion with timid eyes. This was the place where they would live in the future. They would no longer have to squeeze on a small bed with their grandmother and mother. Would she have a room of her own? The woman named He Xiao, whose hand was held by the little girl, also had a look of realization on her face. A few days ago they were bullied on the street. The whole family was squeezed into a small room. In the blink of an eye, they lived in a big mansion with maids and servants. All of this made her feel like she was in a dream. Beside her, a man in his 40s was rubbing his hands nervously, but his face was full of excitement. There were no houses within 500 feet of the Viscount's mansion. However, there were people looking around carefully from a distance. They had long heard that the manor had welcomed a new owner, who was a Viscount personally conferred by His Majesty. All the villagers craned their necks to see what the Viscount looked like. "Let's go in first." Lee waved his hand and led the way into the new house. The servants also swarmed in and stood neatly in the yard. Looking at the group of servants standing respectfully in the yard, Lee was still a little unaccustomed to it. From now on, everything, including their life and death, was in his hands. It turned out that this was the life of a noble. No wonder so many people wanted to be conferred the title of king or minister. The word power could indeed bring people different experiences. Chapter 355. Open your eyes wide and look carefully. In front of you are the masters of the Lee family. This is the Marquis of Chong'an County, personally appointed by His Majesty. This is his wife, and this is the second Miss. Uncle Lee stood in front of the servants and said loudly. Now there were dozens of people in the Viscount's mansion. Naturally, it was different from before. All kinds of daily affairs needed to be taken care of. Of course, these things could not all be handed over to Li or Rui. Of course, a housekeeper was indispensable. Madame Dowager specially asked Uncle Lee to help her manage these affairs. That was to say, from now on, Uncle Lee was the housekeeper of the Viscount's mansion. There are only so many masters in the mansion. You must be respectful and not disrespectful. Except for the maids, no one is allowed to enter or leave the inner residence. It was the first time that the servants of the Lee family met their masters and listened to the housekeeper's words. They stood respectfully in the same place and secretly remembered everyone's faces. They were perturbed. They did not know what the temperament of this lord was like, and whether he was easy to get along with. What was the temper of Madame Dowager? She might have to serve him carefully these days. They were all registered as slaves, and were the property of the Viscount's mansion. If they accidentally violated the taboo of their masters, no one would speak up for them, even if they were drowned in a well. All right, all of you go and do your own things. There are not many people in the house. Just do what you should do on a daily basis. Li waved his hand to the crowd of servants and said, Madame Dowager has poor eyesight. Pick 2 clever maids to serve Madame Dowager, and let the others do their own things. In addition, for the first time you meet, each servant will be rewarded with a sum of money from the accountant. There was a lack of manpower, so Uncle Lee was both the housekeeper and the accountant. Many of the servants were delighted to hear this. This amount was already a month's salary for them in the Viscount's mansion. More importantly, Lord Ju was generous and seemed to be amiable, so he shouldn't be difficult to get along with. Their days in the future would probably be much easier. Even some of the pretty maids began to feel excited in their hearts. If their appearance could catch the Lord's eyes, they would really become a phoenix. Even if they could not become a concubine, their status would be great. However, when they saw the Lord's wife, second miss, and even their personal maids, they could not help but feel discouraged. With their appearance, they really could not compare. Besides, second miss actually carried a sword with her. If the consequences were too serious, all the maids would give up this unrealistic idea. When they came from Chong'an Prefecture, they traveled light and had almost no luggage. However, the Viscount's mansion had all the necessary furniture. If they really needed something, they could go out and buy it. When they came, they saw that the Viscount's Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion, Lord's mansion. Li and Rui naturally had to choose a courtyard in the inner mansion. Duanwu, Xiao and Lord's mansion stayed together. Mississippi Lu chose another. Xiaohuan did not dare to live alone, so she stayed with her. Fong and Uncle lived in the outer mansion. As the mistress, Rui was taken by 2 maids to familiarize herself with the Viscount's mansion. Xiaohuan also followed. Mississippi Lu was tidying up her own room. Li sat on the stone bench in the courtyard. The maids and servants who passed by had to salute him respectfully. All of them were proof that this place would belong to him in the future. Imagine, the sunlight was slightly intoxicating. The weather was beautiful, leisurely lying in the courtyard and basking in the sun. The two pretty maids on the left and right massaged his arms and legs. Then there was a talented maid who sang and danced. When he was tired of watching ordinary dances, he asked Miss Lu Air to perform a sword dance. With this life, what more could he ask for? Half a year ago, he was still hiding in the mountains, drinking porridge and stealing chickens. Now he had crossed the threshold of being well off. He lived in the most prosperous city, with a group of maids and servants. He officially lived the luxurious life of a feudal aristocrat. Young master, are we not going back to Qing and Mansion in the future? Fang asked with a confused face. Li felt that he had fallen. He was actually thinking about whether there was a big mansion with maids and servants in Qing and Mansion. It seemed that it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. He had not even started to enjoy, but he had already forgotten the hard life before. Anyway, it's not too far. If your wife agrees, you can come to the capital with her and Juzi. If old Sue and the others are willing to come, you can come with them. There will always be a place for you here. They had gone through the toughest days together and experienced life and death together. The group of people far away in Qing and Mansion were actually the most trustworthy people. Okay, I'll go back tomorrow. Fang had obviously been waiting for Li Yi to say this. He slapped his thigh and said, after going through so many things, they were used to treating Li Yi as their backbone. The son-in-law and mistress were both in the capital, so there was no point in them staying in Qing and Fu. Those people were restless in their bones. If they followed the son-in-law, there would be exciting things to do. In just a short half a day, all the servants in the Li mansion had figured out the situation in the mansion. At the same time, they let out a long sigh of relief. Lord Ju and Madame's temperament was very good. They did not say a harsh word to them. Second Miss gave off a cold feeling, and seemed difficult to get along with. However, when a maid accidentally tipped over a basin of water and wet her shoes, Second Miss did not say a word of reprimand. In addition, Madame's personal maid was very favored. She was just like the other master of the house. She must not be treated as a servant. Everyone secretly rejoiced at their luck. They did not have to worry about things like drowning ponds and filling wells in the future. Mississippi Lu returned to her room with a face full of anger. Li Yi had chased her out of the courtyard in the name of going to bed early. It's only been half a month. What's there to catch up on? Li Yi curled his lips. He closed the courtyard door and walked into his room. Rui stood by the bed and tidied up the bedding. She turned back and quickly turned back. Her gentle voice traveled over. When I came to the capital, I thought I would be going back soon. I didn't bring much with me. If we are going to stay in the capital in the future, I'm afraid we will have to go back as soon as possible to bring all the important things. At the very least, we have to bring the money at home. Li walked over slowly and hugged her from behind. Rui's hands paused. Her pretty face immediately turned red. Who, hubby? Her breathing was slightly hurried, and her voice was barely audible. My wife's words from before, do they still stand? Li whispered in her ear. Of course, she knew what Li Yi was referring to. She slowly turned around. She was half a head lower than Li Yi. Her face was even redder. She looked up into his eyes and nodded slightly. Li Yi lowered his head to look at this flawless face. This was his wife, the person he was destined to spend the rest of his life with. Taking a deep breath, he exerted a bit of strength and hugged her tightly, pressing his lips against her smooth jade-like forehead. Then he kissed her eyes, nose, and lips. In the room, the candlelight flickered. A gust of wind blew in from an unknown source. The flame flickered a few times before it quietly extinguished. The beauty lowered her head shyly. The gifted scholar raised his eyebrows and smiled. A room full of love. Chapter 356. At noon, while Lord Ju and Madame were eating, the servants of the Li family gathered together and whispered to each other. When Xiao Rong was pouring tea for Lord Ju this morning, she accidentally knocked over the teacup. Guess what happened next? A servant girl said mysteriously. Xiaorong is always so careless. She must have been scolded badly. She might even have been fined. Another servant girl pouted. If that was the case, I wouldn't have mentioned it in front of you. The servant girl who spoke first shook her head. Another servant girl was shocked and said in disbelief, Did Lord Ju kick Xiaorong out of the residence? What do you mean by kick out? Not only was Lord Ju not angry, he even rewarded her with money and said something about peace and quiet. The servant girl's face was full of envy. She wished that she was the one who broke the teacup. Hearing this, everyone was stunned. How could there be a servant who didn't get punished for doing something wrong, and instead get rewarded? If it was any other family, breaking a teacup in front of the master would be a light reprimand. A heavy punishment would be beating and scolding. Even 2 slaps would be considered a light punishment. There's more. A look of envy appeared on the maidservant's face as she continued. Xiao Qing's table was polished a little brighter, and the floor was swept a little cleaner. Lord Ju was so happy that he increased her salary by 50%. Hiss! Everyone took a deep breath. Their faces were full of envy. On the first day, their monthly salary was increased by 50%. Why didn't such a good thing happen to them? At this point, the servants of the Li family understood that their Lord Ju had a habit of rewarding people whenever he was happy. It seemed that they had to perform well in the future. Their future was suddenly full of expectations. I understand now. No wonder Li San came out with a bunch of broken vase pieces. He already knew about it. A servant in green suddenly realized. Li San also got his monthly salary raised. Another servant said with some dissatisfaction. What the hell was this? They worked so hard, but they didn't get rewarded. Others who broke teacups and vases were either rewarded or increased salary. This was too unfair. A few servants were already thinking about what other worthless things there were in the residence. Should they find a chance to break them too? Otherwise, wouldn't they be at a disadvantage? Promotion fee? The well-informed servant girl shook her head and said, I heard that Li San was viciously kicked twice by Lord Ju. He is not allowed to eat until he fills the 2 large vats of water in the residence before nightfall. The servants looked at each other speechlessly. It seemed like this method was not going to work. Right, Xiaorong and Xiao Qing were both maidservants. Could it be that only the maidservants in the residence had this special exception? All the male servants immediately felt somewhat indignant in their hearts. This kind of matter, they couldn't decide for themselves. Why are you all gathered there? Have you all finished your work? A voice sounded out from behind. Everyone's faces changed as they dispersed. In the entire estate, compared to Lord Ju, they were even more afraid of Butler Li. Fong and a middle-aged man were squatting at the door, each holding a huge bowl in their hands, eating and chatting happily. Li called them twice, but they weren't willing to sit at the table, so he let them be. Old Foreign couldn't see, and needed someone to serve her when she ate. For this matter, Little Aunt wasn't willing to let the maidservants do it for her. She only sent someone to deliver the food to Old Foreign's room, and she fed Old Foreign mouthful by mouthful. At the dining table, Li placed all the dishes that Duanwu couldn't reach onto her plate. The little girl was too skinny. She was still growing and should eat more. Thank you, big brother. Perhaps it was because of her character from a young age. She didn't speak much, and always had a timid look. Even though things were different now, it was a habit that was formed over a long period of time, that wasn't easy to change. On one side sat Duanwu, and on the other side sat Xiao Huan. The most considerate servant girl was always the little servant girl. She knew what he liked to eat, and what he didn't like to eat. In the time it took for Duanwu to take food, her own bowl also piled up into a small mountain. Alright, that's enough. He stopped the little servant girl from taking more food into her bowl. Although the cooking skills of the Fu's maids were not bad, he still had to eat slowly. Mississippi Lu was still holding a grudge against him for forcefully chasing her away last night. There were a few times when Li wanted to eat something, but she always snatched it away before he could. He was in a good mood today, and didn't intend to argue with her. She raised her head and met Rui's eyes. A red cloud immediately appeared on her face, and she quickly lowered her head. Although they had been married for half a year, It had only been a day since they became real husband and wife. It was understandable that she was a little thin-skinned. Thinking about it, it was better to be alone. In a few days, he would go back to Qing'an Prefecture and arrange everything there. Only he and Rui would go back, without Mississippi Lu. It would be a honeymoon trip. It would be fun to walk and see along the way. The scripture for the old monk was almost finished. After a few days, he would send someone to Cold Mountain Temple. This matter would be settled. He still had to find a chance to discuss the business with Her Highness. It was definitely not enough to rely on the salary of the court to support the family. This matter concerned dozens of people in the Viscount's mansion, so he couldn't be careless. From a family of 4 to the master of such a big Viscount's mansion, it was not easy to adapt to the psychological gap. In addition, he had no experience and laziness. If Uncle Li, the housekeeper, didn't take care of everything, Li really didn't know how to run it. Not long after the meal, old mistress of the Li family came to the mansion in person. On the one hand, she wanted to see how her grandson's Viscount's mansion was doing. On the other hand, she had a lot to say to her granddaughter-in-law. The two of them talked in the room, and Li was not allowed to go in. Later, old mistress saw that there were not many maids in the mansion, so she insisted on sending some from the Li family, but Li persuaded her. There were not many people in the family. Why did they need so many maids to serve them? They didn't need to be used, and took up space. What's more, these people needed to be paid. The mansion was still in the stage of development, so they should save as much as possible. In the end, old mistress walked into the courtyard where his grandmother's family lived. When Li walked into the room, he saw her holding his grandmother's hand apologetically and saying, "I'm sorry for making you suffer all these years. If it weren't for the Li family, the He family wouldn't have lived so hard these years. But if it weren't for the He family, the Li family wouldn't have turned against the good in-laws and declined so much." It was no longer clear who was right and who was wrong about the things that happened in the past. However, even if the Li family declined, for the He family, who were just commoners, it was still an existence that they couldn't afford to reach. At first, old mistress was a little reserved, but later she gradually relaxed. When Li walked out of the door, they talked about something happy, and their laughter could be heard far away. Chapter 357. Although the Li family had indeed been greatly affected by what had happened back then, wasn't the He family also a victim? Of the two old people, one had lost a son, and the other had lost a daughter. In this matter, they probably had very similar feelings. Li didn't disturb them. He walked all the way back to his room, stepped into the door, and saw Rui writing something at the table. In fact, in the family, only Xiaohuan didn't know much. Although Sister Rui didn't go to school, she was literate. Li walked closer and quietly watched her write. Perhaps because of practicing martial arts, she had excellent control. This beautiful hairpin-style small regular script was not written by ordinary people at all. There is a beauty in the north, peerless and independent. Seeing the beautiful handwriting on the paper, Li was slightly stunned. This poem was copied by him for Zheng Zimo. Although in the end, it helped her more than she helped, the poem must have been spread out. It was not surprising that Rui knew about it. However, Rui had never been interested in these things. Why was she so abnormal today in copying poems? Seeing Li coming over, she put down the pen and said with a smile, "A smile can make a city fall, and another smile can make a country fall." Being described like this by my husband, Lady Zuamo, the goddess of Luoshui must be extremely beautiful when she smiles. The expression on Li Yi's face was a little awkward. After all, if his wife knew that he had praised other women like this outside, he would always be a little lacking in confidence, especially when he had accidentally seen that woman's naked body. However, Zheng Zimo was a stubborn girl. Although she was a little stubborn, there was nothing to say about her beauty. Her figure was simply heaven-defying. Compared to Rui, each had their own merits. If only Li soon found that his thoughts were anchored. He laughed dryly and said, "In fact, it's not that good. Poems are always exaggerated. A smile can make a city fall. How can there be such a thing? This is not beauty, it's sorcery." Rui was silent for a long time. She seemed to have made up her mind and said, "If you are really interested in Lady Zumo, how about?" Li Yi quickly waved his hand and said, "Don't get me wrong. Lady Zuemo and I are just friends. At that time, I just wanted to help her win the championship. I had no other intentions." For Rui to be able to say this sentence, it really made Li Yi extremely surprised. Based on what she said, the next thing she wanted to say was to welcome her into the house. This happiness had come too suddenly. Although almost all men yearned for a life with a group of wives and concubines, especially when their wives and concubines were so beautiful. As a good young man in the 21st century, he had received modern ideological education and was deeply influenced by monogamy. Of course, Li Yi had also yearned for it. However, there was a big difference between thinking about it and actually doing it. On the one hand, there was such a beautiful and gentle wife at home, so it was unlikely that he would have other thoughts. On the other hand, feelings could not be forced. Although Zheng Zimo was beautiful, had a good figure, could sing, dance, and draw well, it would be a problem if a man did not have any thoughts when facing her. If he could welcome her home, just thinking about it was a bit. Bah! On the one hand, there was no emotional foundation. On the other hand, she did not have any feelings for him. This matter was not feasible at all. Rui looked up at him and whispered, "Don't worry, husband. I am not a jealous woman. If you did not have feelings for Lady Zuemo, how could you write such a poem? Don't, it's just a few poems. If you are willing, I can write 10 or even 100 for you now. Lady Zuemo and I are really not what you think." Li Yi hurriedly explained. Rui's temperament was still more traditional. She considered everything from her own standpoint, which made Li Yi feel angry and amused at the same time. How could there be a legal wife who would take care of finding a concubine for her husband? If the person who said this was Mississippi Lu, then he would definitely refuse her sternly at the first moment and give her a severe ideological education, indicating that he was devoted to Rui and had never thought of taking a concubine. Because he knew that as long as he showed a certain desire in front of Mississippi Lu, what was waiting for him was definitely not a happy life with a beautiful wife and concubine, but a sword that would cut him in the head. But since Rui could say so, she must have thought so. He didn't know how long she had been struggling when she made this decision. "Husband, you really didn't." When Rui raised her head and spoke uncertainly, Li Yi had already held her in his arms, patted her shoulder and said, "Don't think too much. I really didn't mean it. Don't say that I didn't mean it. Lady Zuemo didn't mean it either. Don't say these words again." The relationship between men and women in this world was still conservative. If they were not husband and wife, they probably wouldn't have too much contact on normal days. However, for Li Yi, who had a modern mind, it was really normal to have a few friends of the opposite sex. Even Fong had a mysterious little Hong. If their temperaments were compatible, and their temperaments were congenial, a friendship that started with feelings and ended with etiquette was still worth advocating. With Wan Ruoqing, with Zheng Zuemo, with Emingzu, these were all the purest relationships between men and women, except for the occasional dreams he would dream of them. But this kind of thing was out of Li Yi's control, and he had never had any improper thoughts in reality. If he really got all of them together, even if he didn't worry about the harmony of the harem, he would have to worry about his kidneys. "I understand," Rui said softly with a slightly red face. A light cough came from the door. Mississippi Lu knocked on the door and said, "Have you guys hugged enough? Someone is looking for you outside. It seems to be from the palace." After saying that, she looked into the room with a strange look, turned around and left. Rui hurriedly left Li Yi's arms, and her face became even redder. Li Yi's expression was slightly annoyed. He was always disturbed at the critical moment. Rui was getting more and more unruly. Thinking about what the people from the palace were doing, he inadvertently glanced down and found that there was not only the beauty song on the table, but almost all the poems he had given to Zheng Zuemo. Thinking about it for a while, although most of these poems were exaggerated, he had to admit that the stubborn girl was impeccable except for her stubborn temper. Whoever married her would really enjoy a good life. He turned to look at Rui and asked tentatively, My wife just said that if I am interested in Miss Zue Mo, what will happen? Rui was stunned, and suddenly the corners of her mouth curved up. She smiled and said, "What did I say just now?" After a moment of daze, Li also smiled, shook his head and walked out of the room. Looking at his back as he left, the smile on Rui's mouth spread. She put the poems on the table carefully in the drawer, and a rare slyness flashed in her eyes. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.